At 42 million...
The art world, where paintings change hands for fortunes.
Sold, thank you very much.
But for every known masterpiece, there may be another still waiting to be discovered.
This is it.
International art dealer Philip Mould and I have teamed up to hunt for lost works by great artists. We use old-fashioned detective work and state-of-the-art science to get to the truth.
Science can enable us to see beyond the human eye.
Oh, my goodness.
Every case is packed with surprise and intrigue.
Is it, or isn't it a Freud, then?
But not every painting is quite what it seems.
Gosh, why didn't I notice that before?
It's a journey that can end in joy.
There is enough to support the conclusion that it is by Tom Roberts.
Or bitter disappointment.
I don't think it's a work by Gauguin. I'm very sorry.
This time, could a work discovered buried in the brambles of a Norfolk back garden be by celebrated sculptor Henry Moore? If it is, it could be worth a fortune.
My God, there's a lot at stake with this one, isn't there?
Our investigation takes us on the trail of Henry Moore through Norfolk to his home in Perry Green to discover how he created his masterpieces.
Could it be the starting point?
Yeah.
That then becomes yours?
What thought?
What a thought.
But there's a forgotten artist in the frame.
The first thing I've got to ask you, do you recognise it's one of your mother's works?
Will science help us solve the mystery?
Well, this is a surprise.
It's now, I think, more important than ever to work out what it's made from.
We're on the road, heading east to the beautiful county of Norfolk, a place of inspiration for so many artists. This week's case brings us to the medieval city of Norwich. We've come to meet a couple who'd like our help to investigate a mysterious work of art.
Hello. Oh, nice to meet you.
Hey, nice to see you. Shall we have a look at your sculpture?
Neil and Barbara Betts have invited us to see a curious sculpture they've owned for over 20 years. They hope it might be an undiscovered masterpiece.
This is Henry.
Henry? And why is he called Henry?
Well, we have a very dear art historian friend, and she remarked that he was very much like a Henry Moore sculpture. So from then, he became Henry.
Gosh, well, wouldn't it be wonderful to add more to the name Henry? Because Henry Moore is one of the leading sculptors of the 20th century, influential, much collected, and you have an intriguing-looking object here that has some of the characteristics of this great man. Henry Moore is one of the biggest names in the history of art. Born in 1898, he was the son of a Yorkshire miner who rose to international fame to become one of the most celebrated sculptors of the 20th century. He was inspired by the way natural and organic objects could be transformed into art. His monumental bronzes can be seen all over the world, and his works can sell for millions. Could this piece actually be by the great man? Its story begins in 1987, when Neil and Barbara's former neighbours asked for help to clear their garden at a place called Mergate Hall.
I went there with the strimmer and I kept catching certain items, and then eventually I came across this.
What, you just sort of hit him with a strimmer?
Yeah, hit him with a strimmer. And so we got the wheelbarrow out, put him in and took him to the house, and that's where he stayed as a doorstop for years.
As a doorstop?
As a doorstop.
Henry stayed at Mergate Hall until their neighbour, Mr. Williams, passed away. Mrs. Williams moved to a nearby barn conversion, and Neil and Barbara cared for her until her death in 2000. They had no idea what was in store for them.
I got a phone call from the executors and said, Mrs. Williams has left you the barn and everything in it.
So she left you her entire home and contents?
Yeah.
Wow, but it speaks volumes about what your relationship with her was. I mean, that's so touching that she obviously felt...
Yes.
What, did she feel you were like family to her?
Well, she actually told the staff, or the nurses and everything, that I was her son, that she never had.
Oh, that's lovely.
It was a big shock, as you can imagine. So that was how Henry came to us.
Henry was there.
So Henry came to live with you, and then what did you do with him?
Well, we had a water feature in the garden, so I decided to put a pipe up his back to the top of his head, and water would flow over it, and he was there in the garden for quite some time.
And I did actually look into melting him down as well.
Shame on you, shame
It's
on
all
you.
coming out now.
I'm sorry to say that, but I did.
Oh, my God.
I weighed him and worked out how much he might be worth. I think it was £50.
£50, yeah.
Well, I hope you rue the day that you considered melting this down, because I reckon that is a first, isn't it? We're off to a promising start because Henry has already caught the interest of the Henry Moore Foundation.
We sent all the photographs and any data that I got on it, sent them through to them, and they came straight back to us and said, it's very, very interesting, and would you like to put it to the panel?
And that's a very significant step forward, because the Henry Moore Foundation get hundreds of inquiries every year from people hoping they might have a genuine Henry Moore, but only about 30 or 40 get put through to the review panel, and that is the panel that decides whether or not it is a genuine Henry Moore or not.
In the eyes of the art world, they have the Roman emperor's power to say yes, or no.
And so what you want us to do now, then, is make the strongest possible case
Exactly, yeah.
for the Henry Moore Foundation then to consider.
Yes.
Well, if we can prove that this is a one-off, not one of a series, but a unique object by a much-loved, highly regarded sculptor of the 20th century, we could be talking in excess of £500,000. Who knows? Could even be £1 million.
Wow.
Up to £1 million.
That's extraordinary. Absolute shock. This is Henry, the doorstop.
The water feature.
The water feature.
But as always, there's a flip side to this. So if it's not accepted as a Henry Moore, well, it might only be worth a couple of £1,000s.
We say on Fake or Fortune, so often there's a lot at stake. But my God, there's a lot at stake with this one, isn't there? The difference between it being accepted as Henry Moore or not is just massive.
And it's also quite awe-inspiring to think that he could have been made by him. I think that's the bit that I find quite intriguing, is that he could have actually done that.
Well, whether it is by Henry Moore or not, either way, it's a lot more than 50 quid if you've melted it down.
Yeah. It's not my finest moment.
The first stage of our investigation is to examine the physical evidence. I'm taking a closer look at the sculpture. On first setting eyes on this, the feeling I get is of presence, a feeling of power in a way, of going back to the dawn of time. This is part bone, it's part fossil. It's trying to express something frightening, perhaps. And then when you begin to break it down into its component parts, you can see elements that you associate with Henry Moore. This great, solid, bone-like structure here, slightly angled at the top. And then beneath that sharp, expressive tooth. I've seen something similar to that before. And then a very Moorish touch, what looks like a hip bone. This rather gentle, rather beautiful hollow. There are elements which, although I haven't seen them put together in this way, are reminiscent of Henry Moore. One thing I find curious is its colour. When I think of Henry Moore, it's bronze, it's that sort of browny, yellowy hue. And this is silvery. It's not the colour I associate with him. That needs to be explained. I have to say that it's really impressive. I find myself rather blown away by it.
I'm keen to know what Neil and Barbara have managed to discover so far.
So you found Henry with your strimmer
Yes.
in the grass at Mergate Hall. And have you managed to do any research into how it might have got there?
Yes, I knew that the lady who owned the property before was a lady called Betty Jewson. She was an artist, and she had lots of famous artist friends.
And what kind of artist friends?
We did a bit of research and we actually found an article which is on there on the local history website.
All right, so she was an accomplished artist, especially in sculpture and painting, and a member of the Women's International Art Club. Henry Moore was one famous name who visited the hall on a number of occasions. He already had connections to the area, as he often visited his sister, who lived in Mulbarton in the 1920s. Gosh, what did you think when you saw that?
Shock again, I think, really, because it was the first real connection that we had.
Yeah.
So it was great optimism, I think, when we saw that.
One thing that slightly rings alarm bells is it says she, Betty Jewson, was an accomplished artist, especially in sculpture and painting.
Exactly.
So that's got to raise a possibility that it's a sculpture by Betty Jewson and not by Henry Moore at all.
Yes, exactly.
That wouldn't be quite so good, would it? I mean, if it turns out that it is a Henry Moore, how will you feel about him?
Can't even think like that.
No, I can't think like that.
It's just too big a thing to try and take in.
Yeah, far too much.
Yeah, well, we'll see what we can find out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can't wait.
I've come to Perry Green in Hertfordshire on the trail of Henry Moore. This is where the artist lived and worked from 1940 until his death in 1986. Today it's home to the Henry Moore Foundation, which safeguards his legacy. The network of studios where his greatest masterpieces were conceived have been carefully preserved. And in the gardens, Moore's monumental bronzes are displayed in nature as he intended. There's no better place to gain an understanding of the great sculptor, to steal a glimpse into the creative workings of his mind. Surrounded by Moore's strange organic shapes and abstract forms, I want to see how Neil and Barbara's piece compares to these genuine works. And there's one colossal sculpture that I find particularly compelling.
I always think the key to understanding Henry Moore is to realise that his particular artistic truth was all to do with the core of things, the raw, the elemental, getting down to the meaning of life as he saw it. And this is a brilliant example of that. It's called three-piece vertebrae. And at first glance, these are the crucial bones to an animal or a human. And yet, the more you look at them, so they seem to change. I mean, yes, they are bones, but also they feel like stone.
Is it reaching far back into some sort of Neolithic imagery or symbolism?
So the question is, do we see in this epic piece here any echoes, any resonances in Neil and Barbara's piece?
Well, I suppose the most obvious thing to point out is that central sort of spur-shaped nub in the middle, which in Neil and Barbara's sculpture is a little bit more nose-shaped, but you can see they're related in some way. And then there are these thrusting upward points, almost like embryonic teeth. Well, we've seen something very similar in Neil and Barbara's piece. And taking it as a whole, the sort of turning, undulating nature and feel of bone, we see something very similar in Neil and Barbara's sculpture. Just in visual and aesthetic terms, there's enough similarities going on for me to want to know more.
I'm heading out of Norwich on the trail of this intriguing sculpture. If it is by Henry Moore, how did it end up in the Norfolk countryside? To find out, I've come to the place where it was discovered, a fine medieval manor house, Mergate Hall. This is where the artist Betty Jewson lived from the 1930s until her death in 1981. According to local history, Henry Moore visited on several occasions. Eleanor Chubb now lives at Mergate Hall. She's agreed to help me find where the sculpture was discovered.
Hi there.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
What a beautiful place.
Thank you.
Absolutely lovely. Now, I've got a map here
Okay.
that Neil has given me. X marks the spot, and I think it leads over there.
Yes.
Shall we try and...
Yeah, of course.
Can you guide me to it?
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
After the Jewson family left Mergate Hall, Neil and Barbara welcomed their new neighbours, Mr. and Mrs. Williams. It was in 1987 that Neil helped them clear the garden and discovered the sculpture.
So we're looking in this undergrowth, in this clearing.
Just here?
Yes.
So this is where Neil hit the statue they hope is by Henry Moore with his strimmer all those years ago.
Indeed. It does make sense that work was found here. Betty Jewson had a lot of artist friends that visited here. It makes sense there was work by artists that she would have met, as well as her own work found in the garden.
And there's a story that Henry Moore visited here as well. Do you know anything more about that?
It's not beyond the realms of possibility. They came from the same timeline. They both did sculpture, worked with abstract forms. So yes, I think there's a good chance that they would have known each other.
It's a very intriguing possibility.
Since Eleanor and her family moved to Mergate Hall 20 years ago, they found other sculptures in the grounds, works which they think are by Betty Jewson.
So these are some of the pieces that have been found in the garden over the years.
And these are Betty's works, are they? Betty Jewson's works?
We believe so.
So looking at these, I can see kind of some similarities with Barbara Neal's piece in terms of the forms being organic, and then some things look completely different.
It's reassuring that nothing looks quite like Neil and Barbara's piece, but this might be only a fraction of Betty Jewson's work.
So tell me what you know about Betty Jewson.
She was a really inspirational woman, I think, and very much within the local community. She founded the Pottergate Gallery, was very instrumental within the contemporary art movement, and a woman as well.
Breaking barriers, wasn't she?
Very much so. I mean, I think people forget how difficult it was for women to be making a difference in that sort of era.
Well, really interesting to see these pieces. And I think if we're going to go on the trail of Henry Moore, we need to find out more about Betty Jewson, the woman and her work.
I think you're going to have a very interesting research journey.
Back in London, I need some images of Neil and Barbara's sculpture, so I've sent it to a studio which specialises in 3D scanning. The team are using photogrammetry, which is the process of reconstructing 3D models of objects using 2D photographs. This specially designed rig acts as a robotic photographer, capturing hundreds of overlapping images from different angles. These images are then processed with special software to mesh them together. The result is a 3D digital model which can be rotated and viewed from any angle. I now have a supreme overall image of Neil and Barbara's sculpture. For anyone studying art these days, it's an invaluable innovation.
How could a Henry Moore sculpture end up in the garden of Mergate Hall? According to local history, the artist visited on several occasions. But is that true? It turns out Henry Moore was well connected to this area. In the early 1920s, his family moved from industrial Yorkshire to Norfolk in the hope that the country air would help Moore's ailing father. Moore's sister Elizabeth had already settled in the village of Mulbarton. The young sculptor was living in London, studying and then teaching at the Royal College of Art, but during the holidays he stayed there. And intriguingly, this is just along the road from Mergate Hall.
It's so fascinating to think that Henry Moore stayed here with his sister Elizabeth, who lived here with her husband in the old schoolhouse, and he was headmaster at the school just next door. And this is about, just a mile and a half from Mergate Hall. And I've got a letter here that he wrote when he was staying at the schoolhouse, written in 1927, and he describes his average day. It's a fascinating account. So he says, up about 9, begin carving about 10, carve for an hour, then stretch my legs, getting a pear or two off the pear tree, then do it again until 12:30. Lunch and reading the daily news until 2. He's got a whole routine going on here. Carve again till 4, after which a game of croquet. My aim, he says, is to now increase the hours of carving by cutting down on the croquet and the paper reading. that's just a brilliant insight. And then we've even got a drawing he did here at the schoolhouse. And I love this bit here. These are all the works I haven't done. So he's got all these in his mind, hasn't got around to them yet, except this one on the right of the woman stretching her arms up in the air, because he did complete that one. And here it is. And what this shows is that Henry Moore was working, sculpting here at Mould Barton, just so close to Mergate Hall. Is it possible that his and Betty Jewson's paths did cross? It's an intriguing possibility.
I'm in East London on the hunt for evidence. To find out if Neil and Barbara's sculpture could be a work by Henry Moore, I need to discover how it was made and, crucially, what it's made of. I've sent the piece to Rupert Harris, one of the country's leading sculpture conservators. He conserves works in the Royal Collection and in museums and art galleries all over the world, as well as civic sculptures standing in our towns and cities.
Hello, Rupert.
Hello, Philip. How nice to see you.
Very nice to see you.
Let me go and get the sculpture for you.
Thank you.
Rupert has intimate knowledge of the works of Henry Moore, so I'm keen to see what he makes of Neil and Barbara's piece.
So you've had a lot of experience with Henry Moore sculptures, haven't you?
A fair amount, yes. Yeah, I think we've probably worked on over 60 or 70. We've seen most of his styles right through the period of his life, so I'm very familiar with form, yes.
Now, I'm intrigued to know, what are your first feelings of response to this piece?
Well, it has elements that you would say are exactly as Moore would make objects. I mean, particularly the head, and this, we'll call it the rhinoceros horn. This is very typical and is seen in a large number of Moore sculpture. And the whole bone shape form is something that he repeated time and time again.
What do you think of those feet, which look a little bit strange? I haven't seen them, almost like elephants.
They are slightly worrying, because normally with these sorts of forms, they would balance naturally on the points of the sculpture rather than having deliberate feet. So they are unusual, without a doubt.
How about the materials? What's it made out of?
Well, I think the areas on the top and on the rhinoceros horn are where it's been handled and rubbed, which has exposed the underlying metal, which in this case has a yellowish tinge to it, which would indicate a copper alloy, or whether it's a brass or a bronze, I don't know. But the other thing, which I often do with sculpture, all metals have a certain ring to them. And so I would gently tap sculpture, and if I tap this, and in this case, it sounds very hard, quite bell-like, and it could easily be the sound you would expect from a bronze, rather like a bell.
Henry Moore started his career carving stone and wood, but after the Second World War, he embraced the use of bronze.
So that could be the sound of bronze that we've just heard, but it doesn't hugely look like bronze to me, not the sort of bronze that I associate with Henry Moore.
No, I would absolutely agree with you. This grey-white finish is very unusual, but I understand that it was a water feature at some point. And if that's the case, and over a long period of time, limescale builds up on bronze. It quite likes bronze. And it could well be that what we're looking at is a bronze sculpture coated in limescale.
Now, that's reassuring, because that's the thing that's always worried me about this, is the materials. So although at first glance it might not look like it, this could be Moore's favourite metal of bronze.
It could be.
So what we're looking at suggests to you Henry Moore, but the unfathomable part now is exactly what the materials are and how it was made, which could take us closer or further away.
Absolutely, yeah.
The trail of Henry Moore has led me to the North Norfolk coast. Not far from Wells next to the sea, Moore had another family home. His other sister, Mary, had taken a teaching post in the village of Whiton, and Moore was a regular visitor. The schoolhouse where Moore stayed is now an art gallery and home to Diana Cohen.
Hello, Fiona.
Diane, how very nice to meet you.
Welcome to Whiton.
I've come to see your garden and what you found in it.
Let's go round.
I've come here because Neil and Barbara aren't the only ones to have made a discovery in a Norfolk back garden.
And this is a lovely view. Absolutely lovely, Diana. So is this what you found in the garden?
Yes, we were levelling the ground, And we unearthed this. And Alfred said, this has been worked on. Look, you can definitely see a head emerging. And you can see chisel marks.
Diana and her late husband, the artist Arthur Cohen, suspected they'd stumbled on the beginnings of a work by Henry Moore, so they decided to show it to him.
We went to have tea with Henry Moore one day, and we took it with us in an old Marks and Spencer carrier bag. And he said, oh, he said, I remember doing that piece. He said, I broke my best chisel doing that, and I was so cross. He said, how kind of you to bring it back. Thank you so much. After we'd had tea, my husband said, what a lousy art dealer you are. You find a Henry Moore and you go and give it back to him.
So you gave it back to him, and he remembered making it?
He remembered making it, yes, yes. And then years later, we were going to put on a Henry Moore exhibition here at the schoolhouse, and we went down to select the pieces to his house at Much Hallam. And I told them about this piece, and we couldn't find it anywhere. We looked and looked and looked, and then my husband saw it being used as a doorstop. And he said, that is our piece, that is it. So we had that in the exhibition, and of course then, after that, they gave it back to me.
And these chisels, are these Henry Moore's?
Yes, we found them in the ground. The handles are rotted away, but there were 4 chisels we found.
We've got some photographs, actually, of him here, very smartly in his bow tie.
And always with a cigarette.
Yes, as you can see there. And working away with this extraordinary view and being inspired by the landscape.
And, of course, the ground is full of these stones which inspired him. He had a whole collection of them.
Henry Moore said, there is in nature a limitless variety of shapes and rhythms. It was on his visits to Norfolk that he first began collecting flints, bones, and natural forms.
Actually, when you think about particularly his monumental sculptures, you can see those shapes evolving out of these natural forms.
Absolutely.
And of course, this kind of flint is everywhere in Norfolk. Look, it's in the house.
It's everywhere, in the buildings, everywhere. Every time you dig the ground, you find something.
Moore said of his homes in Mulbarton and here in Wyton, I'm thankful for these 2 spots in Norfolk where I can sit in the open air, cross-legged on patches of grass and chipped stone.
Well, we don't know how the piece that we're investigating ended up in a Norfolk garden, but the fact that you found this genuine Henry Moore in your garden at least shows us it is possible.
And we took it back to him, and he identified it and said, yes, it was mine.
Well, you can't get a better authentication than that.
You certainly
If only
can't.
we could still do that now.
Exactly, exactly.
I'm returning to the Henry Moore Foundation to find out about Moore's working methods. Curator Dr. Hannah Hyam is going to show me where many of his ideas began. Hello, Hannah.
Hello, Philip. Should we go in?
Love to. This is Moore's maquette studio. It was his place of inspiration, where he surrounded himself with a myriad of shapes and textures. Moore's collection of found objects, stones, bones, and natural forms intermingle with hundreds of maquettes, the plaster models he'd make when experimenting with ideas.
It's such a privilege to be in a place like this, to be able to get into so great an artist's mind as this.
Yeah, it's an incredible place, actually. From 1940 onwards, Henry Moore makes all of his sculpture, all of his monumental bronzes that have now become so iconic. They begin in the palm of his hand as one of these sketch models, these little studies, these sculptural studies. And the benefit he found of working in this way was that he could turn it round, he could see his idea from all angles. And he had this wonderful capacity to imagine something on a large scale, even though he was conceiving of it in this small form.
And I can also see loads of found objects, natural objects as well.
Yes, Henry Moore collected natural, organic objects throughout his life, be they pebbles on the beach or seashells, bones, both unearthed bones, but also even those from the Sunday roast pot, and of course flints from the nearby fields which he would pick up on his walks. And they line the shelves, intermingled in complete meritocracy, really, with his maquettes. And these were the things that inspired so many of his works, and he called this his library of natural forms.
So how would he have gone about making a monumental work?
Very, very often, these natural forms, these found objects, were the inspiration, they were the idea. So sometimes he would add plasticine or plaster to a stone or a bone, and they were experiments. They sometimes ended up being worked up, first at this size by Moore, then often with the help of his assistants to an intermediary size working model about sort of this sort of size. And then, of course, again, to form those monumental bronzes we're so familiar with. So this was really a kind of encyclopedia of Henry Moore's thoughts and experiments and creative processes over a course of a lifetime.
The workshop of his mind.
Absolutely.
It's extraordinary to think that so many famous works by Moore have had their beginnings here. Hannah has given me some time to explore.
There's so much here, so much to inspire Henry Moore. I mean, there's literal bone like this. I mean, there's a skull of a rhinoceros, I think, and whalebone. And then there are flints and shells and all sorts of things that you can imagine were the starting point for ideas that look as though they're almost changing into art as you look at them. And I'm particularly looking for anything that resonates with Neil and Barbara's sculpture. And there's one object there that looks particularly intriguing. I'd love to get a close look at it.
I've asked Neil and Barbara to join me here at Perry Green. I've got something to show them that I hope might bring us closer to Henry Moore.
Well, hi again.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, hello. So we're surrounded with all of the ideas, the thoughts of Henry Moore's sculptures to be. And amongst them all, there is this one that I'd like to show you.
Oh, yes, it's got the same feeling about it.
It has. It's got the shape.
It's got the shape without the tooth part, but it's got the shape. It's fantastic.
So the question that we have to ask is, does this object in some way relate to yours? Could it be the starting point, the flame of a thought that then becomes yours?
Mm. What thought?
What a thought, what a thought.
What a thought. It is quite amazing, it really is, to think that that could have become that. It makes it all seem a bit more real.
Yeah, it does.
Well, we still have an awful lot more to try and prove.
I'm sure.
And I feel that in this sort of big task ahead of us, this is a foothold.
Definitely. Are you all right? It's quite surreal, isn't it?
Just ask you to pinch me.
It's very exciting, Philip. Fantastic.
Back at the gallery, we're trying to establish a timeline. To do that, we need to date Neil and Barbara's piece.
So if Neil and Barbara's sculpture is by Henry Moore, we've got to work out how it fits into his body of work. And if we can put a date on it, we'll be able to work out when Betty Jewson might have acquired it.
Well, I've been looking at Henry Moore's catalogue raisonné. Look at this. This is from 1940, and intriguingly, it's called Pointed Form, a drawing for a metal sculpture.
I mean, there's absolutely no question about it. There's a real resonance in this sculpture of images like that, you know, the points and the hollows.
Well, if you think about that, have a look at this. There's a whole series of them, again, from 1940.
Yeah.
And one of them was, in fact, made into a metal sculpture. Look at that very distinctive point. Again, this is 1940. But then, from the same set of drawings, one didn't become a sculpture until nearly 30 years later, in 1968.
Yeah, but I suppose that's not altogether surprising, because we do know that Henry Moore would return to his earlier dreams and thoughts, and they would sort of erupt later in his career.
Well, a whole series of them erupted, because look at all these. Again, these are all late 60s, all with these distinctive points. And that raises the question, if Barbara Neal's piece is by Henry Moore, is it from 1940, thereabouts, or from the late 1960s?
Well, it could, of course, be 1940s, but it also has, I don't know, a slightly later feel to it. It feels that it dates from the late 60s, when all of these points were pushing up through his art.
But that does concern me slightly, because if Henry Moore, let's say he gave a sculpture to Betty Jewson in the late 60s, he was a renowned international superstar at this point. So how did it end up in the garden?
Yeah, it does feel a bit odd, doesn't it? Have you managed to establish any more about the link between Henry Moore and Betty Jewson?
Well, we've still got that story, that sort of local folklore, that Henry Moore visited Betty Jewson at Mergate Hall, but I need to try and find some evidence for that, work out if it's true. And then we've still got this thing that is nagging away at me slightly, that Betty Jewson herself was a sculptor.
Yeah, and I have to say that's been in the back of my mind also. But do we have a clearer idea of what her sculpture looked like?
Well, I've seen some, also in the garden, and they don't look anything like the sculpture that we're looking at, but I need to see more. To find out more about Betty Jewson's work, I've come to Goldsmiths at the University of London. We know that Betty was a member of the Women's International Art Club, so I'm meeting Una Richmond, who's extensively researched the group.
See you. Hello, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Their archives are held here in the Women's Art Library. I'm hoping Una can tell me more about the elusive Betty Jewson. So, Una, we know Betty was a member of the Women's International Art Club. What was that?
The Women's International Art Club was set up in around 1900, and it aimed to provide an opportunity for women artists to exhibit, because at that time there were few opportunities. And to a certain extent, that remained the same for most of the 20th century.
And did Betty have to be a sculptor of a certain stature to be accepted into the club?
Yes, she did. There was a selection process, and we've actually got Betty Jewson's application form.
Oh, it's got an A on it.
And that means she was accepted and elected to the club.
When Betty was elected in 1973, she was in good company. Famous sculptors Barbara Hepworth and Elizabeth Frink were also members. A year later, Betty was part of a Women's International Art Club exhibition in London. The Feminine Eye, it's called. Gosh, you can't imagine calling an exhibition of women sculptors the Feminine Eye these days, can you? And so, oh right, so this is her piece here, Betty Jewson, Parentage. Gosh, it's hard to see why that's called Parentage, isn't it? It's a profile, bronze, and it was 5 inches by 5 inches, so what, like that? So pretty tiny, actually, unlike the piece that we're looking at, which is considerably larger. Other exhibition catalogues include more of Betty's works. Will I find anything close to Neil and Barbara's piece? If I do, it could be game over. Dancers, Embrace and Polar Bears. 2 in bronze, 1 in brass. OK, that's interesting to know the material she was working in.
But sadly, no images.
Those titles certainly don't sound like Neil and Barbara's sculpture. One more catalogue to go. Will Neil and Barbara's piece be listed? So here we go. Betty Jewson, Cock and Eagle, both in bronze. Photographs?
I'm afraid not.
I'm so desperate to see more images of her work. She was a gallery owner as well, wasn't she?
Yes, we have a press cutting of the opening of her Pottergate Gallery in Norwich in October 1973.
A former florist in Pottergate, Norwich has been converted into an art gallery which intends to become a showcase for contemporary work in the city. And is this Betty here?
Yes, with the grey hair.
She's pretty redoubtable, actually. Smiling away, though. Betty exhibited her own work at her gallery, and she caught the notice of the Art Review magazine. The sculptures of Betty Jewson are small, competent pieces in bronze and aluminium, and show an individual approach, particularly in the interpretation of the horse and rider theme. Horse and rider theme? I mean, that doesn't sound like our sculpture either, like Neil and Barbara's piece. Any more pictures, any further this trail goes?
I'm afraid not.
I need to see more images of her work if I'm going to try and establish whether there's any chance that she could be the one responsible for Neil and Barbara's sculpture.
Derby is our next stop on the trail of Neil and Barbara's sculpture. We need to examine the work forensically, so Rupert and I are heading to a materials testing lab. The facility is equipped with all manner of machines and devices designed to analyse different metals. To determine whether the work is by Henry Moore, we need to find out how it was made and, crucially, what it's made of. First, we're using an industrial X-ray to look through the sculpture. This should give us some indication of how Neil and Barbara's piece was constructed. But will it be in keeping with Moore's techniques?
Well, this is a surprise. Looking at this X-ray, this is a solid casting. The reason I know that is that where you have density, high density, you have the white. And normally with a hollow bronze, you would have a cavity inside here, which there isn't in this case.
You see, that's a surprise to me, because when you tapped it earlier, it sounded hollow.
That sounds hollow, but clearly, judging by the X-ray, it is not.
OK, so that's curious, but how do you think it would have been made then? I mean, looking at the X-ray.
I think it's a sand casting.
Sand casting is the process by which a plaster maquette is pressed into sand to create a mould of its shape. Molten metal is then poured into the void to create a solid sculpture.
Did Henry Moore use the sand casting process?
Yes, he did. Many of the foundries he used specialised in sand casting. However, a sculpture of this size, I would normally have expected to be hollow.
So it strikes me that this X-ray is showing both good and bad news. We know the process that this was made from is one that Henry Moore used, but the fact that it's solid is a concern.
It is a concern.
So it's now, I think, more important than ever to work out what it's made from, and that might take us closer to an answer.
Absolutely, yeah.
Our investigation into Neil and Barbara's sculpture has taken a troubling turn. I'm heading west to Devon in search of answers. There's someone I want to meet who I hope can help us answer whether Neil and Barbara's sculpture is a work by Betty Jewson or not. I've managed to track down Betty's son, Ed Jewson.
Hi, Fiona.
Hi
Good
there.
to see you. Come this way.
Thank you.
Ed has several of his mother's works on display in his home and garden. He's gathered them together so I can see whether there's anything similar to Neil and Barbara's piece.
Well, Ed, this is a lovely collection of sculptures here. These are all by your mother, by Betty.
They are.
This is rather lovely, I must say.
It's lovely.
Yes. I mean, this, to me, definitely looks like a horse.
Yeah.
But otherwise, they're very organic shapes, aren't they? What kind of materials did she use, generally?
Well, anything from bronze, obviously, to cement fondue, which is something she used quite a lot, through to welding together farm implements and so forth. So it was a great variety that she used. I got a photograph of her. Here, there you are.
Oh, look at that.
There she is, and that was taken in the mid-70s.
Right, when she was sculpting.
Yeah.
And what was Betty like as a character?
Character's a good word. She was quite a character and was much loved by all. She had a great laugh, she had a wild sense of humour, and lived life to the full.
I'd like to have met her. She sounds great.
I wish you had. We miss her terribly.
Let me show you a picture of the sculpture that we are looking at. This is it here. Now, do you recognise it's one of your mother's works?
No, I haven't seen it before.
Well, they're hoping it's by Henry Moore, so that's good news for Neil and Barbara. I mean, that's very good news, actually. And do you look at this and think it could have been one of your mother's?
Well, it's always possible. She was a great follower of Henry Moore and really liked the way he sculpted.
Because this was found in the long grass at your former home where you grew up at Mergate Hall, hit by a strimmer.
Wow. Bother, if it is by Henry Moore, dear, oh dear. I thought I'd cleared them all up, but obviously I've missed that one.
Let me ask you about another important connection. There's sort of local folklore, if you like, that Henry Moore visited your home, Betty's home, on a number of occasions. Do you remember Henry Moore coming to the house?
No, I don't, I'm afraid.
OK, so that's less good news. What about, I'm thinking, given that your mother was a sculptor and had trained as an artist, and she opened a gallery, of course, the Pottergate Gallery in Norwich. Did she move in the kind of artistic circles where she might have met Henry Moore that way?
Well, she could have done. I mean, she was a great friend of Augustus John, and I think there's some connection between Augustus John and Henry Moore.
Because the renowned painter Augustus John.
And in fact, he drew several portraits of my mother, and that's one of them.
It's absolutely
Lovely, isn't it?
enchanting. Yes, gosh, it is. She looks beautiful, but what a beautiful portrait as well. So she could have met Henry Moore through Augustus John.
Oh, I think it's more than possible, yeah.
And if in the end we do find out that Neil and Barbara's piece, which you missed when you were clearing out the garden at Mergate Hall.
Yeah, thanks.
If it does turn out to be a Henry Moore, how will you feel about that?
Well, I mean, obviously, I'd be delighted for Neil and Barbara. It will teach me to clear up after myself, but also by understanding that my mother was definitely in contention. It shows her work in quite a good light, which makes me feel very good.
Back at the gallery, I've invited Neil and Barbara for an update.
So I've asked you to come here today because I have some news for you. So I met Betty Jewson's son, Ed. First of all, the good news is he does not recognise your piece as being by his mum.
That's good.
That's a relief, isn't it?
Yes, relief.
The bad news is he has no recollection or knowledge of Henry Moore visiting his mother at Mergate Hall. So we've done a bit of digging. Augustus John, the famous painter.
Looks a character.
He does. It's a great picture, isn't it?
Mm.
Now, he was a friend of Betty Jewson. So was there any connection between Augustus John and Henry Moore? Now, when we looked through some of the archive of Henry Moore, what we found is this letter from the 21st of November, 1979. Now, look at this bit here. This is Henry Moore writing, and he says, I think I met him, Augustus John, around 1928, when I had my first one-man exhibition at the Warren Gallery in London. John bought 2 or 3 drawings. So there we've got a link.
A link.
Yeah,
Yes,
between
definitely.
Augustus John and Henry Moore.
Mm.
You'll notice he bought drawings, he didn't buy sculptures. Because I was thinking, is it possible that Augustus John bought a sculpture? He knew
Yes.
Betty Jewson, did he give it Betty Jewson?
Yes, yeah.
I can't make that connection.
No.
Okay.
So, dug a bit further. So here we've got Betty. It's a great picture as well, isn't it?
Lovely lady.
Brings back a few memories.
Yeah, it does. Amazing lady.
You remember she had the Pottergate Gallery in
Yes.
Norwich? So here she is, looking very different.
Oh, my goodness.
Now, this character here, this is Bernard Reynolds, the sculptor.
Okay.
This is an exhibition. This is her first exhibition, actually, at the Pottergate Gallery in 1973. Now, Bernard Reynolds was one of Henry Moore's first assistants in 1936.
Yeah?
Wow, there's a link there.
There's a link there, and that's not the only one. Let me take you back to the Pottergate Gallery. I want you to look at this man here.
Okay.
Now, this is John Farnham.
John Farnham.
And John Farnham also worked for Henry Moore as one of his assistants. Here he is, Henry Moore, of
Yes.
course. From
Oh, wow.
1960 until Henry Moore's death in 1986. And here he is,
Okay.
working on one of Henry Moore's
Wow.
sculptures. Not one, but 2 assistants linked to Betty Jewson, but also crucially linked to Henry
Yes.
Moore. We're so close.
That's
Yeah.
incredible. So interesting.
Not quite there yet, but we're getting closer.
Fantastic. Thank you, Fiona.
Back in Derby, we're trying to find an answer to a crucial question. One that could solve this mystery once and for all. What is Neil and Barbara's piece made of? Metallurgist Ian Copestake is using X-ray fluorescence, also known as XRF, to detect the elements present. Henry Moore used a variety of materials throughout his career, but his favourite by far was bronze. Strong yet malleable, it allowed him greater freedom to create the monumental sculptures he's famed for. Bronze is an alloy consisting of copper and tin, along with other trace metals. But will the XRF detect these vital elements?
Hi, Ian.
Hi.
So, are we any closer to working out what this is made of?
Well, I'm getting copper, I'm getting tin, which are the main constituents in bronze, but the tin content isn't really high enough to class it as a bronze alloy. I'm also getting quite a lot of lead and zinc in the analysis.
That's slightly problematic because that would indicate a different alloy than bronze itself.
That's disappointing.
Yes, the limitations of this instrument, it only is able to see a fraction of a millimetre into the metal surface. So anything that is on the surface will significantly skew
So
the
the amount
results.
of corrosion on the surface, that would suggest that there is likely to be quite a lot of contamination of the reading that Ian's getting.
That's correct.
The only way to get an accurate reading is to take a sample of the sculpture and analyse it. Only then will we discover what Neil and Barbara's piece is made of.
Since we last met, Betty's son Ed has been doing his own detective work.
Hi, Fiona.
Ed, very nice to see you.
Very good to see you.
He's eager for us to see more of his mother's works, so he's contacted family and friends all over the country to track them down.
Ed, wow. I mean, this is an incredible collection.
It's quite something, isn't it? I mean, actually, some of these I haven't seen before.
There's a wonderful array of abstract shapes in bronze, brass, and aluminium. But I can't help noticing that some of them have the same motifs as Neil and Barbara's piece.
Now, looking at these, the point in the centre, and looking at Neil and Barbara's, look at the point there.
There's definite similarity, isn't there?
Well, there is, but also, I've looked at drawings by Henry Moore in his studio, and this is the kind of thing that Henry Moore was doing. So it's very much a motif of Henry Moore as well.
OK.
I can't help but be drawn to these two beside me. So this is the plaster maquette, and then this is the bronze here. So look, let's look again at Barbara and Neil's. Now, think about that knobbly sort of head, if you like. Can you see similarities there?
Indeed. Very marked, yeah.
But again, this is very much a motif of Henry Moore as well.
Yeah.
Two artists using the same motifs, one inspired by the other. Can we untangle who created Neil and Barbara's piece?
I'm going to put you on the spot now. What's your instinct?
Well, I hope it's probably my mother, but, you know, the jury's out, no doubt.
Back in Derby, Rupert and I are heading to a forensic engineering lab. It's equipped with a scanning electron microscope, which should reveal what Neil and Barbara's sculpture is made of. A small sample is placed in the chamber. Electrons interact with the sample, producing signals that can help identify the elements present. Rupert and I are waiting for forensic engineer Arthur Green to process the results. We're finally about to find out whether Neil and Barbara's sculpture is made in a material used by Henry Moore.
Hi, Arthur.
Hello there.
Arthur, hi.
So, have you managed to ascertain the metal that Neil and Barbara's sculpture is made of?
We have, yes. So we've analysed it using our electron microscope, and so I can show you the results now. And as you can see, it's consistent with an aluminium alloy.
Aluminium alloy?
Yes, that's correct.
So that big, red, jagged peak is all aluminium?
Yep.
Rupert, have you ever heard of Henry Moore using aluminium alloy?
The answer's no. It cast in many other metals, but not aluminium, as far as I'm aware.
It's not good news, is it?
I don't think it's good news, and I think it's quite surprising, really. All along, we anticipated it was going to be a copper alloy of some sort. I thought we were going to be much closer to a metal used by Moore.
It's not looking good, is it?
It's not looking good, no.
We've done all that we can. The only option left is to send Neil and Barbara's sculpture and our dossier of evidence to the review panel. It consists of a committee of experts who meet twice a year at Perry Green. And it is they who have the final say as to whether this is by Henry Moore or not.
Back at the gallery, the verdict letter has arrived. But while the review panel has been assessing our evidence, some new information has come to light.
Well, before we give the verdict to Neil and Barbara, we have to tell them about this latest discovery.
I know, but research is research. It's a two-edged sword, and we just got to accommodate the facts, whatever they are, as we find them.
I mean, the stakes are so high. If this is a Henry Moore, it could be worth up to £1 million.
Neil and Barbara are on their way to the gallery. We're all about to hear the decision from the review panel as to whether their sculpture is a work by Henry Moore or not. But first, we need to tell them the latest twist in the tale.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Neil and Barbara.
Hello.
So I've got here the verdict. But before I tell you what's in there, I just want to share with you some new information that's come to light. After we sent our dossier of evidence to the Henry Moore Foundation, Ed, Betty Jewson's son, went to visit a family relative who he'd not been able to see for over a year because of the lockdown.
Right.
And while he was there, he found this. Recognise it?
Yes.
Henry. He thinks this picture was taken in the garden of his mother's, Betty Jewson's gallery, the Pottergate.
Okay.
On the back of it is written Betty Jewson, and at the bottom, ciment fondu, so cement. Which is odd, because we know that Henry here, as you call it, is not made of cement. Now, Ed thinks that this writing is not his mother's, not Betty's. So whoever wrote this got the materials wrong. It's not cement. But whoever wrote it thought it was a work by Betty Jewson.
Okay.
So that person might be right, might be wrong. Can't say. But what it certainly doesn't do is take us any closer to Henry Moore.
No.
And we now have another issue that we need to share with you, and that is that we have had the metal tested, and it is not bronze as we had hoped or expected, but it's aluminium alloy. Now, as far as we know, that is not something that Henry Moore ever used.
But Betty Jewson did.
But it's not over yet.
The odds are stacked against us, but the final decision rests with the Henry Moore Foundation review panel.
Do you want to hear the verdict?
Definitely.
Please.
Dear Mr. and Mrs. Betts, unfortunately, the panel members are in agreement that the work is not by Henry Moore. I'm sorry not to bring more positive news, and I thank you for bringing this work to our attention. So sorry.
Well, it was going to be one or the other, wasn't it?
I mean, for what it's worth, from the first moment I saw that, I was impressed by its presence and its boldness, and it hardly surprises me that the foundation took an interest in it.
No.
I've got to admit, I'm gutted for you, I really am.
No, don't be.
The journey's been really
The
good.
journey's been incredible. We've had such a good time. It's been lovely. He will go back to being a doorstop again and a treasured memory, really.
And will you still call him Henry?
Always.
Yes. Definitely.
He will always be Henry.
I feel so sorry for Neil and Barbara. What a disappointment. And they really took it on the chin, didn't they? On the other hand, I really enjoyed getting to know Betty Jewson. She was clearly a remarkable woman and a serious talent.
And also, it's a reminder of just what a colossal presence Henry Moore was in 20th century sculpture, and how he created a language that was so potent that it influenced generations of artists.
At 42 million.
The art world, where paintings change hands for fortunes.
Sold. Thank you very much.
But for every known masterpiece, there may be another still waiting to be discovered.
This is it.
International art dealer Philip Mould and I have teamed up to hunt for lost works by great artists. We use old-fashioned detective work and state-of-the-art science to get to the truth.
Science can enable us to see beyond the human eye.
Oh, my goodness.
Every case is packed with surprise and intrigue.
Is it? Or isn't it a Freud, then?
But not every painting is quite what it seems.
Gosh, why didn't I notice that before?
It's a journey that can end in joy.
There is enough to support the conclusion that it is by Tom Roberts!
Or bitter disappointment.
I don't think it's a work by Gauguin. I'm very sorry.
This time on Fake or Fortune, we're on the trail of one of the most popular 19th century Orientalist painters.
We've sold pictures by Gérôme for up to £3 million.
Wow. It's a picture that's been rejected for the last 20 years by the leading expert on Gérôme.
It was a sore point between us for many years.
will unearth new evidence that questions the original decision.
But this is feels like a bit of a breakthrough.
We'll decipher clues hidden within the painting itself.
I can't see any poor quality here.
And use cutting-edge technology to uncover its secrets.
Just the sort of thing that you might associate with a faked painting.
But questions remain about its authenticity.
I would expect better from Gérôme.
Can we reveal the truth about this intriguing picture? Every year, we hear from thousands of people asking us to solve a mystery about their artwork. Deciding which ones to investigate can be tricky, but every now and again, we get a request from the far side of the world which is just impossible to ignore. So when we received an email from Los Angeles, California, we were intrigued enough to arrange a special long-distance delivery.
You know something? I just love this moment in the investigation when we see the picture in the flesh for the first time.
And this is when we can really start to look for clues. So we have what looks like a man at prayer in a mosque, kneeling, hands raised.
And a painting with all the appearance, characteristics of a work by the leading 19th century French painter, Jean-Léon Gérôme. This small oil on canvas is called Arab at Prayer and shows exactly that. But whoever painted it was just as interested in the setting. The man is kneeling on a prayer mat with his shoes off, and behind him there's a large white structure covered in what appear to be intricate Arabic carvings and geometric patterns.
And rather helpfully, we have a signature, though as we know, that doesn't necessarily prove anything. But Gérôme is, I assume, who the owner thinks this painting is by.
And it's up to us to prove one way or the other. Born in 1824, Jean-Léon Gérôme was a master painter of the 19th century. At his peak, he was the most famous living artist. His supremely realistic style was hugely successful and in stark contrast to the later Impressionists. His reputation was built on his early paintings of historical or classical scenes, but he's now perhaps best known for his depictions of the Middle East. The painting is owned by John Swihart, who lives in Santa Monica in Los Angeles.
John and Kim, very nice to see you. Hello.
You as well.
Hello.
We've arranged a video call with John and his wife, Kim.
So let's talk about your painting. We've got it here. And you bought it in New York, I think. John, is that right?
Yeah, I got it in 1999 at Christie's in New York. It was listed as Circle of Gérôme, so I put a bid on it.
What did you end up paying for it, John?
I paid $6,325.
Whoa, so that's quite a lot. And Circle of Gérôme, just to be exactly clear what that means?
Yes, so Circle of Gérôme, presumably they felt that it evoked the work of the great Gérôme, but wasn't necessarily by him.
Yes.
But what made you decide, John, to spend quite so much money on a painting?
Well, I'm an artist myself. I've been painting for 50 years. I've studied him for many years, and I felt intuitively that it was a Gérôme when I first saw it.
And I'm assuming those paintings in the background are your paintings, John, are they?
Yeah, this is my studio, yeah, and those are my paintings.
And what is it that you love about the painting so much?
Anything that he actually created, it's like holy scripture to me.
John, you're clearly a devotee of Gérôme. I mean, Kim, how does it strike you?
It's a healthy obsession and has been since he was a teenager. There isn't a day that goes by he's not researching some information.
So you're getting as close to the great man as you can?
Exactly, hands-on.
If it turns out at the end of our investigation that this is definitively not by Gérôme, would John have paid a fair price?
Well, then, John, I'm afraid you would have overpaid for it. For a not genuine work, it's going to be worth little more than £1,000.
Okay.
However, if it is a genuine work by Gérôme, it's going to be worth 100,000 or more.
Whew, glad I'm sitting down.
I have to say, I rather like the fact that you're both artists. I find that artists either make very good critics or very bad critics of other people's work.
Well, do you want to have a look at the painting in a little bit more detail? And John, will you stay on the line and
Yes.
I'd like to talk to you a little bit more just about the provenance of the painting, and let's see if we can find out how it got to that auction house.
To kick off the investigation, we need to get to know our subject better. There's nothing quite like getting up close and personal with a painting.
I can see that it's definitely a work of quality. There's a lovely feeling of detail, of observation, and the colours, they're bright, sharp, crisp. And then when you look into the body of the Arab man, you see the way that the folds are done are rather exquisitely observed. And that sword, isn't that incredible, that sword? It really feels like an object done from the life, as it were. What's also evident, and you can see in the upper quarter of the picture, are drawing lines, indications that the artist is working out the composition before applying the paint. And then there's the signature. I always distrust a signature, but it is nonetheless quite a confident-looking script, and I would love to try and work out a little bit more clearly whether it could be genuine. I mean, he was an Orientalist. He responded to the market views of the Middle East, exoticism. So this is just the sort of painting that you associate with Gérôme.
But if it's not by Gérôme, who could have done it? A faker would certainly have had a lot to gain.
I can see from John's paintings that he's clearly inspired by Gérôme's meticulous style and attention to detail.
John, before you bought the painting, you already knew a lot about Gérôme, didn't you?
Yes, I started painting when I was a teenager. Gérôme was the first artist I really fell in love with. I studied his work, and that's how I learned to draw and paint. I wanted to paint just like Gérôme. So when I began researching Gérôme, there was very little information available on him, but I kept finding articles written about him by Professor Gerald Ackerman. Eventually, in 1980, I ended up contacting him, and that started a lifelong friendship with Gerald Ackerman.
He's passed away now, but he was the authority on Gérôme. He was the man you went to if you wanted to authenticate a painting.
Yes. Yeah.
And so when you came to buy the painting that you hope is by Gérôme, did you talk to Gerald Ackerman about it?
No, because he was out of the country at the time, and you know, I saw it in the catalog. It looked like an early Gérôme to me, so I put a bid in on it. When Jerry came back to the States, I was excited to tell him that I got this Gérôme that I'm sure is a Gérôme, and I didn't realize that he had been the one that had downgraded it to circle as Gérôme.
Oh, well, hang on a minute. So he had already looked at it
Yeah.
and had decided that, in his opinion, it wasn't by Gérôme.
Yes, and I didn't know he was the one that did that, so he was very unhappy.
So you must have been pretty gutted when you heard that Gerald Ackerman had downgraded it.
I was upset that he was upset because, like I said, he was a great friend of mine. And so we just sort of never discussed it again. It was a sore point between us for many years.
And what did you manage to find out, if anything, about who owned the painting before you bought it?
It sold at Christie's in 1978 as a genuine Gérôme.
So it was then a genuine Gérôme from that point until your friend Gerald Ackerman downgraded it?
Yes.
At the auction you bought it at?
Yes.
Wow. Gosh, that's frustrating, isn't it?
Yeah.
And if we do manage to establish that it is a genuine Gérôme, what will you do with it? I mean, you've had it for 20 years. Will you keep it? Will you sell it?
I think we would sell it because, both Kim and I are self-employed, full-time artists. We'd like to have some, money. Also, we've had it so long, I feel like I'm ready to pass it on to somebody else to enjoy.
Well, John, we'll do our best for you. And hopefully, it is by the great man Gérôme.
That'd be wonderful.
To get our investigation on the right track, we need to familiarise ourselves with Gérôme's work. The date on John's painting is 1858, when Gérôme would have been 34 years old. Now, that's relatively early in the career of a man who continued painting well into his 70s. I've asked Fiona to join me at the Wallace Collection in London.
Fiona, I was really keen to show you this picture because in many ways it's the high watermark of what Gérôme can achieve. And have a look at the background of the painting. Can you see anything?
I can see the signature, which looks reassuringly familiar. Oh, and the date. It's 1859, so just a year after ours was supposed to be painted.
So therefore, stylistically, in terms of what he's capable of, this makes it a really good example. It's called the Drafts Players.
And look at the colours. They're stunning, aren't they? And in terms of trying to establish the authenticity of ours, how does this help us?
What we're looking for is hyper-realistic skill to show detail. He's just better almost than anyone else, almost before or afterwards. But also it's a question of getting into the picture, seeing the technique, seeing how he mixes his paints and how he applies his brush and comparing it to known works. We need forensically to get to grips with it. I think one of the reasons that Gérôme was so successful was that he managed to transport his viewers to a different place and a different time in such a convincing way. There's another painting there, a little bit further down. I'd love to show it to you because it's a great example of some of the issues that we're facing. I think there's some really fascinating, but also rather worrying connections with our picture in this. Have a look at it.
Well, the thing that really jumps out at you is that sumptuous, gorgeous golden robe, and painted in a way that surely is very similar to our painting.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I think in terms of its quality and its composition, it's highly comparable to ours. But here's the rub. Look what it says on the frame.
A follower of Gérôme. So they don't think it's by Gérôme, then?
No, so the term follower, rather like the circle, means that in their belief it is not actually by the artist. It's someone imitating them. And this is where the problem lies, because I think this is a wonderful quality object. Also, the date, 1859, same as the one we've just seen, you know, absolutely bang on when we want it to be, Gérôme. And yet, despite all the similarities, their belief is that this is not good enough.
I was feeling rather encouraged, having looked at that last painting, looking at this one. I'm now feeling discouraged all over again.
Well, I mean, it just shows. Yet again, we're in troubled and complex waters, and we've got to make sure that our picture is so good, has got all the ingredients necessary if it's going to pass the winning post.
Before I go any further, I need a better understanding of Orientalism and Gérôme's place in it. I'm on my way to Sotheby's, where their expert Claude Peening has overseen the sale of a number of record-breaking Orientalist paintings.
Gérôme is described as an Orientalist. Can you explain what that means for us?
So Orientalism was the name given to a whole new genre in art in the mid-19th century. Orient referring at that time to North Africa, the Middle East and Turkey. There was this opportunity for artists as well as travellers to make it across to these countries. And Gérôme was one of them. You can imagine what they must have seen getting off the boat. The light, the colours, and it fed this new genre of painting for audiences in Europe and America. Gérôme travelled to Turkey in the 1850s, to Egypt from the mid-1850s right through until the 1880s.
Orientalism has not been without its critics, it's fair to say, and has had attracted some controversy over the years.
There are certain artists, I think, who could be criticised for depicting the East as a sort of exotic place which was somehow to be looked down upon. It's us and them.
And less civilised than the
Less
West.
civilised. And, you know, the pictures of harems, for example, I would say do conjure up a very inaccurate picture of what the East really looked like. I mean, for a start, no Western painter, certainly no male painter, would have had access to the harem. You know, whereas Gérôme created very respectful narratives with a view to shedding the Orient in a very positive light.
Is it possible that if our painting is indeed by Gérôme, it represents a real person and a real place?
the picture probably brings together different observations that Gérôme made on his travels. He would have been familiar with the mosques both of Istanbul, or Constantinople as was, and with the mosques of Cairo.
Paintings like Gérôme's fell out of favour, didn't they? He was hugely popular in his time.
That's right.
And then completely fell out of fashion.
I think it was more taste that resulted in Orientalism falling out of fashion for quite a large part of the 20th century.
And now?
But now there has been this remarkable resurgence from people, collectors, institutions, museums in the very countries depicted in the paintings. The reason for this is that Orientalist art paints a picture of how those countries looked 100 or more years ago, at a time when photography was only just beginning, and this has contributed to a growth in prices. And taking Gérôme as just one example, I mean, you know, we've sold in these very rooms pictures by Gérôme for up to £3 million.
Wow.
I'm not saying every Gérôme is worth that much, but his work is capable of achieving such prices.
Right. But still, just as an indication of the amount of interest there is.
Absolutely wonderful to see that interest, yeah.
I want to see what science can tell us about John's picture. I've sent it to Aviva Burnstock, head conservator at the Courtauld Institute in London. The technology she uses, combined with her expert eye, could reveal vital clues for our investigation.
So, Aviva, yet again, we're in need of your scientific eye. We have a painting which may or may not be by Jean-Léon Gérôme.
Well, it's certainly a really interesting painting. It's very finely painted. Well, what we could do quickly is to look in ultraviolet light to see something of its condition. What do you think?
Okay. Actually, this is rather exciting. We've never done this before on Fake or Fortune. It's a whole different way of looking at a painting.
What you can see in ultraviolet light is areas that fluoresce in UV and look bright, and contrasting areas that look darker, which in this case look like they've been applied over varnish.
The ultraviolet lamp is showing up another layer of activity. It's almost as if you're seeing the unseen picture, the soul of the painting.
Yeah, well, it certainly looks like somebody, either the artist or perhaps a restorer, has covered up certain areas of the painting. I'm not quite sure why that was.
And are there other things you might also be able to tell us about the painting?
Yes, I mean, if I, for example, look in infrared or make an X-ray, I can look at the technique of painting.
Well, we'd appreciate anything you can tell us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Claude at Sotheby's says Gérôme painted real places. So I want to find out if there are any clues in the composition itself to help focus our research. I've come to the Suleymaniye Mosque in East London to meet Professor Doris Behrens Abousaif, one of the country's leading experts on Islamic cultural history.
Doris, very nice to see you. As you know, Doris, we're looking at a painting which may or may not be by Gérôme. And Gérôme is an artist that you like.
Yes, as an historian of Islamic art and architecture, specialized in Cairo, I have used the Orientalist painters first as a source of documentation.
So let's look at the painting here. Obviously, there's a man at prayer. What about this structure behind him here?
This structure is a mimbar, so it's the pulpit which is used in mosques for the sermon, the Friday sermon.
So that's presumably that...
Exactly, like this one.
In the corner there.
So it's always on the right side of the prayer niche, which we have here, which gives the Mecca orientation.
And the fact that he is facing this way to worship, would he not be facing the other way?
Absolutely. He is praying entirely in the wrong direction.
So he's not praying towards Mecca, he's actually praying away from it.
Yeah. It's not only away, but he's giving his back to the prayer niche, which is clearly a mistake.
And he's put his shoes here, next to him.
Normally, the good thing to do is to put the shoes such that the sword don't touch the carpet or the floor. Something is not quite correct, the way he's kneeling and the way he's holding his hand. This position of the hands is a bit unfamiliar to me.
Right. Is there anything in this painting that could give us any clues as to the location?
The mimbar, most likely not from Cairo. In Cairo, traditionally, the mimbars were made of wood as portable structures, like the one we see here, and most likely has to be located somewhere in Turkey.
And
because
how can you tell?
in Turkey, it is traditional to make the mimbars in marble or stone.
What about the inscriptions and the decoration we're seeing on the carpet, on the minbar behind him?
The inscriptions are pseudo-inscriptions, they are fantasy.
Well, they're just
not
gibberish.
Copies. Yeah, gibberish.
But on the basis of this conversation, it's certainly not encouraging, Doris, because you're pointing out so many things that are just historically not right about this picture.
I mean, you don't look for historical precision and exactitude when you look at Orientalist painters, but here still it is a different kind of error. I would expect better from Gérôme.
Which just look like mistakes, do you think?
The homework was not done well.
Professor Abou-Saif pointed out a number of things that are culturally wrong about the picture. But the question for us is, does that necessarily mean that it's not by Gérôme? Could it be that Gérôme, lover of the Orient that he was, did get things wrong? Understanding how Gérôme worked could be key to this investigation. But first, I need to look into the history of our picture and who owned it. Perhaps that will deliver some more leads. I've come to the Cambridge University Library, where they have one of the very few available copies of the catalogue raisonné. The catalogue is the definitive list of all works by the artist and a starting point for any provenance research. The fact that there are so few copies in circulation shows how little Gérôme is studied and what a difficult job we've got on our hands. This is the catalogue raisonné by Gerald Ackerman, our owner John's great friend. And it's in French, which I think is probably an indication of how little call there was for it in the English-speaking world. Here's John's painting, Arab at Prayer, and it's described very clearly as Cercle de Gérôme, so Circle of Gérôme, not by the man himself. And this was Gerald Ackerman's view. What's interesting about this is it has the history of the painting. So just working backwards, it mentions the sale on the 1st of November 1999 in New York, which is where John bought the painting. But then we go back further in time. We've got the sale here in London, 31st of March 1978, and it is listed as by Jean-Léon Gérôme. So in 1978, unequivocally, it was thought to be by the man himself, Gérôme. Then we can go further back in time, back to 1971, and there's an exhibition in New York at the Schickman Gallery called The Neglected 19th Century. And I've got the catalogue for that as well. And here we have the picture, slightly different title, Praying Arab. But again, the painting is listed as being by none other than Gérôme. So what we've got is from 1971 through 1978, all the way up to 1999, John's painting is clearly, unequivocally attributed to Gérôme. And that changed with Gerald Ackerman in 1999. So what we need to do is go further back than 1971. Where was this painting before this exhibition in New York at the Schickman Gallery? The commentary that goes with John's painting here in the catalogue is even more interesting. Cette peinture semble la même main, so this painting appears to be by the same hand as the painting listed above, which is number 119. That's the same painting we saw in the Wallace collection, Eunuch Guarding a Door, described there, if you remember, as follower of Gérôme. So Ackerman thinks it's by the same hand as the person who did that picture. It then goes on to say, un dessin préparatoire, which means a preparatory sketch, just as Paul, he obviously didn't think much of it, and found at the Cooper Art Gallery in Barnsley, bracket South Yorkshire, remember this was French people reading this, does not help to confirm the attribution. There's lots to pick out of that. First of all, most excitingly, it tells us there is a preparatory sketch for John's painting. What on earth it's doing in Barnsley, I've no idea. So that's a really exciting breakthrough. Less exciting is the fact that Ackerman describes it as aussi faible, so just as poor as the painting of the eunuch guarding the door. He doesn't think much of that either. And also the fact that he says it doesn't help to confirm the attribution. Surely that sketch in Barnsley could be useful to our investigation, even though Gerald Ackerman dismissed it. Frustratingly, I've still got more questions than answers. But this feels like a good time to catch up with Philip back at the gallery.
I'm really heartened by you having uncovered a reference to that sketch. And what I want to do is get out of Barnsley, have a look at it, make sure it's the real thing, it's not a copy.
Well, to be honest, we could do with some good news, because the world authority on Gérôme at the time, Ackerman, was deeply unimpressed by our painting. There are some, frankly, wrong cultural references in it. And then the location. Is it a real location? We just don't know.
Do you know, and I've got a problem, a sort of niggling underlying problem with the anatomy. You know, just have a look at this. Look carefully at that neck. There's a detail here. This is an artist who's known for his exactitude. It looks a bit fat. And then have a look at this. Look carefully at those hands in relation to the body. Aren't they just a bit too big?
Well, I have to say, I had not noticed that, but now you've pointed out, I can't see anything but that. And you would think, yes, an artist of the quality of Gérôme would get that right.
So what I'm hoping is, when I go to Barnsley, this drawing, if it's right, might well, I don't know, explain it. Because frankly, at this stage, our neck's on the line.
See what you did there?
I'm on my way to Barnsley. In the centre of town is the Cooper Gallery, which has the drawing that Ackerman referred to in his catalogue raisonné. Samuel Joshua Cooper was a wealthy 19th century industrialist from here who set up his gallery to hold all the French artwork he'd collected over the years.
I love going to the heart of the gallery like this. The unseen pictures, so many clues and answers can be found in places like this. I think we're in Gérôme country. And here is our image. This is the drawing that I'd come to see. I mean, there's no question about it. It's the same composition, isn't it? I mean, he's kneeling there, his hands are up, he's in what looks like a sort of sacred interior. The big key now to understanding our picture more and understanding this is to try and work out, could this be a copy of ours? Is it, just someone who's seen our painting, or a version of it, just doing a replica? And for that, the answers lie within the drawing itself. First thing I've noticed, actually, is the positioning of the sword. If you look just above the pommel, you can see that the artist has just moved it. There's 2 or 3 different positions. You can see why, because it is so important. It cuts the picture in half. It's a semi-diagonal that takes your eye. Then there's that hand. I was a bit worried about the proportion. I've still got a little bit of that issue. Again, just the sort of indication that this is an artist working out an idea, seeking a solution. I've also just noticed the slippers in the bottom left-hand corner, which are actually compositionally quite important. They allow you to walk into the picture slightly. And they are in a different place. They're on the prayer mat and slightly pointing in a different direction. This is clearly someone who's saying, does it work? In other words, a preparatory drawing, not a copy.
It surely has to be by the same hand as John's painting. The question now is whether this is an early work by Gérôme when he was still finding his way as an artist, or the work of a master forger meticulously planning a deception. If so, would anyone really go to these lengths to create a forgery?
I've been looking into the provenance, trying to find an unbroken paper trail all the way from John back to Gérôme. It's a notoriously hard task with any artist, let alone someone who's been in and out of popularity as much as Gérôme. So up until now, we've only managed to take John's painting back to New York in 1971. How did it get there? Well, It came from a man called Henri Robert from Paris in 1970. So who was he? Well, Henri Robert is a fantastically common French name. So we looked to try and find the most likely candidates called Henri Robert that the painting could have come from. And in fact, there was one who was a Chanel parfumier, rather marvellously. So we talked to his descendants to see if it could indeed be him. And it looks like the answer is no, and it's not, rather disappointingly, that Henri Robert. And as for the others, well, we've hit a dead end. It doesn't look like we can take John's painting any further back than this mysterious Monsieur Robert in 1970. So the only other way to approach it then is to do it from the other end and start from Gérôme and work forwards and see if we can get to John that way. Now, Gérôme had a very close connection with the art dealer Goupil through marriage, and he sold his paintings almost exclusively through Goupil. So we looked through Goupil's ledgers. Frustratingly, there is no reference in Goupil's ledgers to a painting called An Arab at Prayer. Cannot find it anywhere. But there is a reference to a painting called A Turk at Prayer, Un Turc en Prière. Here it is. Now, when it comes to John's painting, we know now that it could be an Arab man at prayer. It could also be a Turkish man at prayer. So is this Un Turc en Prière, in fact, John's painting? The first thing to do is look for the dimensions. Disappointingly, the dimensions are not here. What we have got, though, is the price that Goupil bought it for in 1861, which was 1,000 francs. It then sold on for 5,000 francs, and then 4,500 francs to another art dealer called Gombard in 1863. And after 1863, it just seems to disappear into thin air. There is no record of it. It's just vanished. So where is it? This is as far as I've been able to get. This mysterious A Turk at Prayer in 1863, and then John's painting surfacing in 1970 in Paris before it goes off to New York. That's about a 100-year gap in the provenance, which is not good. Could it be what was originally called A Turk at Prayer and is now known as an Arab at Prayer? It's a very tantalising prospect, but I can't quite prove it.
There's more research to be done on the sketch I saw at the Cooper Gallery. Across the road is Barnsley's Town Hall, which holds numerous documents relating to Cooper's collection.
It's just wonderful how across Britain one can occasionally find these phenomenal collections. And one can only imagine the impact that those drawings and paintings owned by Samuel Cooper must have had in the day on his friends. And here, next to me, is the archive of his notebooks.
The exoticism of Gérôme's Orientalist work was exactly the sort of art that appealed to newly rich industrialists like Samuel Cooper.
I seem to be holding what is an inventory of Cooper's pictures, a little red book, and by coming to G, you've got Gérôme, pencil sketches, bought at Rue Lafitte in Paris, where Gérôme was living. This has to refer to the drawing, surely, that we've just seen. And what I find so reassuring is that he bought that drawing in Paris in 1891 when Gérôme was alive. That's proper provenance. I think that's another really good reason to believe that drawing. Well, there are some other documents here. So this is, scroll forward 100 years, a letter from Gerald Ackerman, the Gérôme scholar. And he's writing to the Cooper Gallery we've just been in about their drawing. So he starts with a heading, Praying Man en face. This is after a painting on wood, which I have long doubted. Trouble is, he's saying it's on wood. John's is on canvas. The finished panel, he says, is weak in so many places that it's never stayed long in any collection. I think that's just a rather unkind way of saying that it doesn't stand up. I'm enclosing a small photo for you. Let's have a look. Yes, very clearly, the same composition. And I think you'll see how weak it is.
referring to the photograph, in the chin, in the drapery that puckers instead of falling with its own weight. This is strong stuff. He's not giving this picture a chance. In fact, I'm sure it is by the same forgerer who did the eunuch guarding a door, signed Gérôme, in the Wallace collection. That was the picture that we saw. So he's saying that the drawing, the painting, and the one in the Wallace collection are all by the same sinister hand, this forgerer, as he calls it. Well, I have to say that in art historical terms, this is very damning. He hasn't left any chance for it being right. And we're going to need to revisit this and represent the argument with real vigour if we're going to prove John's painting.
When Gérôme wasn't travelling, he lived and worked in Paris. The archives there might hold a record of the places he visited and painted, and maybe even a clue to our painting. Papers relating to his life are held at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. So we asked for the help of a researcher in Paris who sent me a copy of his diaries. I've got one of a limited number of copies here, and this is Gérôme talking about his time in Egypt in 1856. I'll just translate as I go along. So, départ pour l'Égypte. So, departure for Egypt. My short stay in Constantinople whetted my appetite, and the Orient is the most frequent of my dreams. We come to Cairo, where we stay for 4 months in one of the houses of Solomon Pasha, who was an official. Lots of paintings, beaucoup de tableaux, more or less successful, more or less to the taste of the public, were made à la suite de ce séjour, after this stay by the banks of the father of rivers, so that's the Nile. So the key thing about this is it puts Gérôme in Cairo in 1856, and he talks about paintings that he did after his stay in Cairo, presumably on his return to Paris. And you think about John's painting, his painting was painted in 1858, so the timing is perfect for Gérôme coming back from Egypt, setting up in his studio attic in Paris and painting. Was this one of those paintings? And what about the mosque? Did Gérôme visit a mosque in Cairo that looks like the one in John's painting? That's what we need to find out. Still, so many questions. Time to regroup with Philip. We've hit a dead end with the Provence, I'm afraid. I can take the painting back to 1970, but I cannot firm up this 1863 Goupil provenance. So that's a 100-year gap. So what have you got?
So I've been doing some of my own research, but this time concentrating on the clothes. This is a model in Gérôme's studio, and we know that he took intense trouble to make sure that he got the clothes right, even importing them from the Middle East. Look at that soldier there, and here we have, in his studio, a photograph of a model wearing original clothes. Now, I want you to have a look at, in particular, the sword.
Oh, yes. Clearly looks identical, doesn't it, to the one in our painting?
I mean, it has to be, doesn't it?
Actually, look at the face of the model. Does that strike you as familiar? I mean, I'm wondering if it is the same person that's in our painting. I mean, the tash is a bit different. It doesn't stick out quite as much. But the profile, the nose?
I would agree. Also, the strong bridge above the eyes.
He's got the clothes and the model, and if it is by Gérôme, he's done the painting back at his studio in Paris with that model. What we do know is that Gérôme was in Cairo at about the right time for our painting, and he liked to paint real locations. So I wonder if that can help us.
Actually, it's funny you should say that, because do you think that this could be one and the same place, this temple interior?
The minbar, I mean, there's definite similarities there, aren't there? And that is a mosque in Cairo?
It is.
Well, in that case, we need to pursue that, don't we? We need to find someone in Cairo who can help us find that minbar.
At last, it feels like we're onto something. But first I need to catch up with Aviva at the Courtauld Institute. to see what she has found.
Hello, Aviva.
Hello.
Have we found anything idiosyncratic, anything that might set the technique apart from others?
I have done a technical analysis which involves some technical imaging, so starting off with an X-ray. But what's really interesting about the X-ray to me is that the raised hand, the left hand of the figure, the background has been drawn very precisely around it. Now, it's a very small scale. It's a very meticulous technique using tiny brushes, which is extremely detailed way of painting. It could be quite characteristic.
Are you saying then the artist has come back with a brush, having painted the hand, and painted around it in order to, give it greater definition?
Exactly that. And that's reinforced by looking at an infrared image, which I can show you. So this infrared image is quite amazing because it shows you very detailed underdrawing of the composition. So not only is the figure drawn in great detail, but also all the architectural elements and all the decorative elements in the composition are drawn in underneath a very thin paint layer.
But it's as if he's left nothing to chance. Every aspect of the painting has been decided beforehand.
Absolutely.
Now, what about this worrying thing that I haven't been able to get out of my head, and that is the fluorescing overpaint, the suggestion that someone might have done something or added a layer to this picture?
Well, here's the UV image that we saw earlier. You can see the contrast between the dark areas of paint that have been added over the varnish. But since I saw you last, I've been able to take a detail of the signature, which you can see very clearly in the ultraviolet here, which has also been added over the top of the varnish.
So now we've got to add the thought that the signature, and not just other areas of the picture, have been added, which is presumably, in my experience, just the sort of thing that you might associate with a faked painting, where the signature has deliberately been put on at a later date to take people in.
A later signature over the varnish is, to me, a big red flag. You see it often used to deceive buyers, but rarely on genuine works. Does this now point to John's painting being a fake? Or can we prove it with something that Gérôme himself did? I need to get a deeper understanding of Gérôme's distinctive traits. Are there patterns or quirks in John's picture that can be seen in other Gérôme paintings? Back home in Oxfordshire, I've arranged a video call with Gérôme scholar Gulru Çakmak.
It's lovely to have your expertise on the programme, so...
Gulru is one of a new generation of Gérôme scholars. She studied his technique in detail and has written extensively on his work. She's based at Amherst, near Boston, on the east coast of America.
So why don't we kick off and start talking about the picture then? So let's look at the background.
This thinly painted red background in the upper right is referred to in the academic parlance of the period as the ébauche.
The ébauche.
The underpainting later that would be painted on top of the primed canvas. And such thinly painted surfaces occur in Gérôme's paintings from the late 1850s onwards.
It seems to me quite an unusual thing for an artist to leave an area, well, it looks unfinished, doesn't it?
The conclusion that I reach is that the artist wants to remind us that this is an artifact that comes out of the hand of the artist, the world as filtered through the imagination of the artist.
So this area is his sort of way of saying, I'm here, I'm an artist, don't forget.
Absolutely, yes.
What about other aspects of the picture? Is there anything you think it's trying to tell you in relation to what might be a Gérôme?
Yeah, the subject matter. He exhibited a painting in Paris at the Salon of 1857. Its title we translate to English as Prayer in the House of an Arnaud Chief. And in that painting, he shows a row of various ethnic types that belong to a militia. The figure in your painting seems to belong to that, the entourage of the chief.
No, actually, Guru, that is really fascinating. So I'm looking at it now. So the central figure has got the same bone structure.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. It may even be based on the same model, perhaps. There is another figure, the red-haired figure wearing a yellow costume to the left of the central figure, and he seems to be wearing the same robe as the figure in your painting.
I can't help noticing the slippers in the foreground. we've got a rather similar pair to some of those that I can see.
These slippers appear again and again in Gérôme's other Orientalist paintings later on in the 1870s. Whenever you see a mosque scene, you always see these slippers.
Moving from the slippers to the rug, we know that this inscription is a work of imagination, don't we? Is this something that you would find in a Gérôme, a man who took his job so seriously?
Let's imagine ourselves being painters. Photography has been declared to the world in 1839 with the invention of the daguerreotype, right? If photography can already do what you can do, how do you justify painting? He could have painted it very precisely if he wanted to, right? But he doesn't, he's not trying to copy it. He just wants to transport us to the idea of the East as filtered through the artist's imagination, experience, understanding of the world.
Knowing how you know Gérôme, do you feel it's by him?
Well, I would need to see the painting itself. If it's by Gérôme, I think it will be an important one that will find its place in the narrative of Gérôme's turn from history painting, let's say, to Orientalism.
So that's exciting. If it is by Gérôme, it's a crucial one in terms of his stylistic development.
Absolutely.
Even though Professor Abu Saif thought the stone minbar in John's painting suggested Istanbul, our investigation has shown that Cairo could still be the location of the mosque. Cairo is such a fascinating place. It made a big impact on me when we visited for one of the first Fakor fortunes, as it did on Gérôme when he was there in 1856. Hi, Dina. Very nice to see you in Cairo. Dina Bakoum is a specialist in cultural heritage conservation in Cairo, and she's been in touch with some news. So we sent you our picture to see if you could identify this rather mysterious minbar that our man is praying in front of. I wonder what you found.
The minute you sent the picture, I actually knew right away that this is a minbar commissioned in Cairo by a sultan named Qaybay in the 15th century.
Have you been able to go to the mosque, Dina?
Yes, and I've sent you also some images of the minbar.
So what is it that struck you particularly then?
That it's a stone minbar, the composition, but the most striking element is the engaged column that you see on the right-hand side of the painting with this very intricate geometric design. It's exactly the one that you see in the picture that we have sent you. This cannot be a coincidence. It is the same minbar.
That's so encouraging that you took one look at our painting and thought, I know that minbar, I know it exists, and that column is unique. What about the panel up the side?
If you look at the balustrade, you see that he placed some inscription, which actually doesn't exist in the original minbar, but there is another painting, a genuine Gérôme, young Greeks in the mosque.
Yes, I've got it here, yeah.
So here, you see that our same balustrade, you see that it's a stone minbar, and you see the flank in the background decorated with these star patterns.
I mean, just playing devil's advocate for a minute here, Dina. We know in the genuine Gérôme that everything about the minbar is fully decorated, and in ours it is not. And I just wonder why he wouldn't do it in this one.
My feeling is for aesthetics. I think if we would have had the whole decoration with the star patterns on the flank, it would have been too much, and maybe the man would not stand so much out. I wonder if he could have drawn it based on photographs, because the Gérôme sometimes did that.
Yeah.
But I do have the feeling that he must have been in the mosque. The area where this mosque is, the Northern Cemetery, was a very visited mosque with lots of appeal to all the travelers, the artists, the photographers.
That's really encouraging, Dina. Thank you so much. I worried when we asked you to look into this that actually we were going to come to a bit of a dead end. But this feels like a bit of a breakthrough. Dina, thank you so much. So grateful.
It's a pleasure.
I've had news from Aviva. She's done a technical comparison between John's painting and the genuine work by Gérôme. She's come to the gallery with her findings.
OK, Aviva, break it to us. Is it good news or bad news?
I've had a chance to look at the Wallace collection drafts players and made some interesting comparisons.
So a known, accepted, documented work by Gérôme.
Absolutely. And what's really fascinating, is this is a UV photo of the drafts players, is that, again, we see the signature applied on top of a varnish. Exactly the same as the Arab in prayer. And not only that, we see other similarities in the underdrawing, and you can see that the whole grid, or the table that the drafts players are sitting on, the drafts board, is all done in fine detail underneath the paint film. It's all drawn in, just the same as the detailed architecture in the Praying Man.
So the idiosyncratic things that were worrying about John's picture are to be found in another work by Gérôme.
Absolutely, and I think even more compelling is the way that the faces and hands are painted in the two paintings. Very fine brush strokes. It'd be very hard to mimic that. They're very, very similar to each other.
Well, I think, technically speaking, we've got a really strong case here. I think we're almost ready to present it.
So that signature on top of the varnish, which looked like a worrying sign of forgery, turns out to be something that Gérôme had a habit of doing. I'm feeling increasingly hopeful about this painting.
We've gathered together all our evidence and, along with the painting, sent it to the leading authority on Gérôme, Dr. Emily Weeks. She is now the person who decides whether a work is genuine or not. Have we done enough to determine once and for all that this is a work by Gérôme and not a carefully crafted forgery?
I think, Philip, we've gone as far with this as we can go now. So let's look at the case for and against.
Yeah, it seems to me that stylistically and technically, we really achieved what we set out to do. You know, we now know that he did use a process that looks like overpaint. No, he used underdrawing. The quirks of this picture are things that we can expect to see in a genuine work by Gérôme.
Culturally, not so good. Because there are quite a few things that are wrong with our picture. He's got his back to the minbar, which someone would not do in a mosque. And then let's not forget, we've got a 100-year gap in the provenance.
And you could throw in that letter from Ackerman, which does give you some reason for concern. He's referring to another image. I mean, could there therefore be an original painting of which this is just no more than a mere copy?
Let's not forget, though, that when Ackerman was downgrading this painting in, 1999, the internet was in relatively early days. He didn't have access to anything like the kind of digital technology to look at things online in the way that we can.
And also, I have to say, I was warmed by that drawing. You know, it did look as though it was preparatory for our painting. It felt linked.
So now we need Emily to have a look and give us her verdict.
After 3 nail-biting weeks, Emily's judgment arrives. Time to call John and Kim.
Hello there. How are you both?
Doing great.
Yeah, we're good.
A little nervous.
So we've sent you your painting back. You've got it there. I think for this moment, we should probably have it out on the easel. Do you want to unwrap it?
Okay.
There he is.
There it is. So how does it feel to have him back in pride of place?
Depends on what the results are.
Well, first of all, let's just remind ourselves why you fell in love with it in the first place.
I've had this painting for over 20 years and have always felt that it was a Gérôme, but now that I'm going to actually find out, I'm pretty nervous about it, I gotta admit.
Wouldn't it be wonderful to be able to add another picture to the corpus of works by this artist who I've really got to admire?
If it isn't by Gérôme, I'm going to spend the rest of my life being teased by a lot of my friends, I can tell you that.
So I have here... I know. Okay, I'm going to open it. Are you ready?
Yes.
Yes.
Dear Fake or Fortune, I have received the painting presently known as At Prayer, thought to be by the 19th century French artist Jean-Léon Gérôme, and the dossier of research notes compiled by your team. As you know,
These notes alone are not sufficient to determine the authenticity of this work, as they leave many questions outstanding and raise issues that warrant further investigation. Having examined the work firsthand, however, I am left with no doubt that this painting is indeed an early work by Gérôme, and I will be including it in my revision of the artist's catalogue raisonnée as such. Congratulations, she says.
Well, that to me, in art world terms, sounds like a resounding yes.
I feel vindicated.
And I think there are lessons to be learned from your picture, from studying it, that might well apply to other pictures out there that could be by Gérôme, but possibly for whatever reason, because of history, haven't. And in terms of value, it's going to be worth £100,000, probably more.
Just reading on in the letter, Emily goes on to say, I look forward to emphasising the insights it provides into the artist's evolution from a painter of neo-Greek and classical scenes to arguably the most influential and important Orientalist painter of the 19th century. I mean, it's a fantastic letter. So how do you feel looking at it now?
Yeah, it looks...
He's saying, thank God.
It looks like a masterpiece now. It's amazing to finally know that it's actually a Gérôme. So thank you guys for this.
Absolutely.
Well, we've loved working on it, haven't we?
Oh, we couldn't be more thrilled. We really couldn't for you both. It's just wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm so happy for John and Kim. I mean, they are thrilled, as are we, and you wouldn't meet a lovelier couple. And actually, reading the letter, do you remember how you were troubled by the thick neck and the fact that the hand seemed so big relative to the size of the head? Well, Emily Weeks has written in here, the weaknesses of the figure were typical of the artist's figurative works at this time. So the thick neck came good for us in the end.
And I think we've witnessed something else today, and that is that sort of jolt when art history moves on. And there are going to be a lot of other pictures out there that now need to be reconsidered. Paintings that we ourselves have seen may now soon get the full mantle of an attribution to the great Jean-Léon Gérôme.
At 42 million...
The art world, where paintings change hands for fortunes.
Sold, thank you very much.
But for every known masterpiece, there may be another still waiting to be discovered.
This is it.
International art dealer Philip Mould and I have teamed up to hunt for lost works by great artists. We use old-fashioned detective work and state-of-the-art science to get to the truth.
Science can enable us to see beyond the human eye.
Oh, my goodness.
Every case is packed with surprise and intrigue.
Is it, or isn't it a Freud then?
But not every painting is quite what it seems.
Gosh, why didn't I notice that before?
It's a journey that can end in joy. There is enough to support the conclusion that it is by Tom Roberts. Or bitter disappointment.
I don't think it's a work by Gauguin. I'm very sorry.
In this episode, can we prove this is a lost work by celebrated Victorian artist Sir Edwin Landseer?
I mean, what a phenomenal piece of painting that is.
Our investigation takes us to a tragic event in London's past.
It must have been just a desperate effort, though, a race against time to get these pictures out of the water.
Can science help us unravel the mystery?
Could it have been water damage?
It may well have been water damage.
Conflicting evidence raises tricky questions.
There is no way you would describe that as damage beyond repair.
Yes, and this is the living proof that a picture can come back to life.
Will we uncover a long-lost masterpiece?
This is a real revelation, actually. Hello.
Hi there. What have we got here?
Well, hopefully, something exciting.
We never know what might be in store when we investigate a mysterious work of art. Will it turn out to be a lost treasure, a deceptive copy, or a worthless fake?
Now that is a powerful picture.
It looks very interesting, doesn't it?
We've been sent this painting by Kathy Romerill from Ascot. She picked it up at a local auction over 30 years ago, but recently discovered it may be a long-lost masterpiece. We've invited Kathy to the gallery to find out more.
Hi, Kathy. Hi, Fiona.
Hello, Kathy.
Hi, Philip.
Thank you so much for sending us this startling picture, which actually, let's face it, is also quite grim, isn't it?
Yes.
You're looking at effectively a snapshot of the horrors of war. It looks as though a mortar has just blasted the scene. There are 2 dead soldiers, a dead horse, a possibly wounded one, and it's enveloped in smoke and flame.
I mean, I have to say, I mean, it's heartbreaking, but it's so beautifully done as well.
Yes, the whole scene brings war really very, very close, and I find it quite emotional.
I mean, it's a really powerful and emotive scene, and also one that was particularly well known in the 19th century. This composition was painted by, to my mind, the best 19th century animal painter in Britain, Sir Edwin Landseer. One of the most celebrated artists of the Victorian age, Landseer was a household name in his day. Born in 1802, his skill at painting animals brought him fame and fortune. His majestic work, The Monarch of the Glen, is one of the most recognizable images of the 19th century. And Landseer's lion sculptures still sit proudly in Trafalgar Square. He was a favourite of Queen Victoria and painted the royal family and their many pets throughout his life. Landseer's extraordinary ability to capture the animal kingdom captivated the nation. Printed reproductions of his work increased his popularity, which is why I recognise the composition in Kathy's picture. This famous scene appeared in numerous prints hanging in Victorian homes across Britain.
So tell us the story of how you came by it then.
Well, it was an auction at Chancellor's in Ascot in the Silver Ring, about 30-odd years ago.
And that's at the racecourse?
Yes, at the racecourse. And when I saw the grey horse, I just felt, although I've never ever got emotional looking at a painting before, but I thought, oh dear, dear, you know, I just stood feeling I was going to cry. It was like he was telling the story of the horrors of war, and I have a love of horses, and so inwardly I made a promise to the grey horse that he would come home with me no matter what.
I mean, I have to say, I've got a grey horse, actually, and seeing that, knowing how frightened horses can be and what it must have been like in war for them. Yeah, I absolutely get how you responded so emotionally to this painting. I can feel it, actually, so you're making me feel very much the same.
So I'm curious about the auction. How was it catalogued to begin with? Was there any reference to Landseer?
No, there was nothing about Landseer. It was just an unknown painting.
The auction catalogue from 1988 lists the painting as a 19th century oil seen after a battle with an estimate of £400 to £600. Determined to take the picture home with her, Kathy bid £720. It was only recently that Kathy's son spotted the scene in their picture had been famously painted by Landseer. The original work was called Time of War, but intriguingly, it is thought to be lost.
It was at the Tate Gallery in London in the 1920s, the early part of the century. The Thames had broken its banks and the Tate was flooded, and it was supposedly lost in the flood.
The Thames flood of 1928 was a tragic event. People lost their lives and thousands were left homeless. The lower galleries of the Tate were flooded and hundreds of national treasures were damaged or lost. Landseer's Time of War was one of them.
So how could it possibly end up here then?
Well, someone could have helped rescue it, and who knows after that what happened.
So I suppose the big question is, have you bought a copy, which is quite possible, or could you have in fact stumbled upon the lost picture, the picture that was considered gone in the flood? In which case, well, it's got condition issues, clearly, which are going to hold it back, but I could see it making, I don't know, £80,000, possibly more. But just as important, you would have recovered a really significant work by a major British artist that was thought lost for getting on for a century.
I actually think it is. But, you know, that's just my opinion. It's so well painted. And, of course, I would love it to be a Landseer.
I'm keen to get the investigation underway by taking a closer look at the physical evidence, the painting itself. Pushing out through all of this mayhem are areas of real beauty. And I found myself sort of drawn like a moth into the smoky area of this grey horse's head on the left. I mean, what a phenomenal piece of painting that is. There's a sort of anatomical understanding going on. And look at the way the nose is done, the soft tissue. You know, you do feel that you could press it and it would give in the same way that the soft nose of a horse would. I mean, unquestionably, something has happened to this picture. It's been traumatized at some point in its life. And if you look into the flank of the central horse, which is, after all, the main part of the composition, you can't really read it. Your eye bounces off it. The paint is opaque. It's sort of milky in areas. Could it be that this is flood damage? And if so, that might take us closer to the possibility that this is one and the same picture that was in the Tate in the flood.
Kathy bought the picture all those years ago with her ex-husband, Barry. They're still good friends, and she'd like him to be part of the investigation. So we're calling him in the States.
Barry, very nice to see you. Thanks for joining us from Florida.
Nice to be with you.
And this is a bit of a fake or fortune first, because we are reuniting you and Kathy. You've been divorced for 30 years or so. And, of course, you're separated by the Atlantic as well. And you've come together to investigate this painting. So, I mean, we're now looking at it to see if it could be a work by Edwin Landseer. Was that something that had ever crossed your mind, that it could be by one of the greats of the Victorian era?
I have to say the answer is no. It had never crossed my mind. We both liked the painting, and that was it.
So if we do manage to find out the painting is by Landseer, what would that mean to you?
Well, it would mean, I think, to both of us, certainly to me, that we had great taste, you know, in the artwork. I'll be delighted.
Well, we'll certainly do our best. Speak to you again soon, Barry. Thanks so much.
Okay, well, thank you.
Bye.
I've come to Edinburgh on the trail of Landseer. I want to see how Kathy and Barry's picture compares to genuine works by the artist. So I'm heading to the Scottish National Gallery. It's home to a wonderfully rich art collection. Works by some of the greatest names in Western art are hanging here, including paintings by Landseer. And there is one which has become one of the most famous images of the 19th century. The Monarch of the Glen. The challenge with this painting is its celebrity. It's hard to get beyond the whiskey bottle labels, the biscuit tin tops, and try and understand what it is about this painting that so reaches you. And in so doing, I think we can get a greater sense of what's going on in Kathy and Barry's picture as well. Landseer is capable of capturing extreme characterization in his animals. I mean, as far as it's ever possible to say this about a wild animal, doesn't he just exude self-confidence? And look at those antlers and the way that they're profiled. It's like a crown. The location feels like a realm. But although perhaps this is slightly idealized, and people do say that about Landseer, it doesn't matter, because the anatomy is so powerful. Just look at the matted fur on the neck of the monarch. Although painted with broad brushes, he's absolutely captured its appearance. But it's the nose that, to me, marks this picture out. That wonderful, buttery description of soft cartilage. And that's exactly how I responded and how I felt when I saw the grey horse in Kathy and Barry's painting. Both these paintings have a capacity to reach you. to affect your emotions by a combination of the artist's empathy with the animal and the most brilliant, incisive anatomical observation. Something very comparable is going on in both compositions.
Back in London, I'm trying to find out more about the past life of the lost Landseer. So I've come to the Royal Academy. The Academy holds important information about Landseer and his works. So I've asked archivist Mark Pomeroy to dig out anything that might shed light on his missing masterpiece, Time of War.
Hi, Mark.
Hi, Fiona.
So what have we got here?
So what we have is a very early catalogue raisonné of all Edwin Landseer's works, published in 1874, just after his death.
Catalogue of the works of the late Sir Edwin Landseer, dedicated by special permission to Her Most Gracious Majesty the Queen, no less.
You need to turn about a third into 1846, and I think you might find something that'll interest you.
OK. 1846. Waiting for a load, at bay, a goodly freight, time of peace.
And you need to turn over for the rest.
Time of war.
They are a pair. They're companion pictures.
Oh, I see. So Time of War, the painting we're looking at, was painted along with another painting, Time of Peace. The pictures, which were exhibited at the Royal Academy in 1846, were presented to the nation by R. Vernon Esquire in 1847. So they were owned by whoever this R. Vernon is.
Indeed.
Right, so we've got an owner. The exhibition catalogue from the 1846 summer exhibition lists both Landseer paintings. Here's an image of Landseer's Time of Peace. It's a fantastically bucolic scene, isn't it, with the sheep and the goats and the white cliffs of Dover and the blue sky, so peaceful. And Time of War?
Time of War's on the next page.
So there it is. Gosh, what a contrast. There's an even smaller image above.
I'm almost certain that's from a souvenir leaflet, a gallery guide, essentially. But there are dimensions beneath the engraving there.
So these would be the dimensions of the original Landseer?
That's right.
The correct dimensions?
Yes.
Oh, my goodness, hang on a minute then. So what have we got? 2 feet 10 inches by 4 feet 4 inches. So the painting that we're looking at, 34 by 52. So 2 feet by 10, 24 plus 10, 34. 4 feet 48 plus 4, 52. So that's bang on, 34 by 52. I mean, that's brilliant, isn't it?
It's very encouraging.
I mean, it's not definitive proof, but that is massively encouraging that the painting we're looking at is exactly the same dimensions as the original. Back at the gallery, we're getting to grips with the evidence so far. So, we know that Landseer painted 2 paintings, companion pieces, in 1846. These are engravings, Time of Peace and Time of War. And we know that both pictures hung in the Tate, and both are thought to have been lost in the Thames flood in 1928.
And tantalisingly, you've managed to establish that Cathy Barry's picture is the same dimensions as the lost painting.
Which is really encouraging, but we also know that Landseer's Time of War was massively reproduced. It was everywhere, even a pot lid with Landseer's Time of War on it.
I think that's rather sweet.
Well, I think it's ghastly. But what it shows is this picture was out there for anyone to copy.
And Landseer's War was copied. Look at this. This came up a few years ago at auction as a copy. You can so easily tell it's a copy. The colours are quite lurid. It just doesn't work, really.
What about this one?
It just looks rather dead and insipid.
When you look at Cathy Barry's, it's just in a different league.
It is. It's so much more intense, more going on, more atmosphere, more detail.
Where we've got a problem is the provenance. We know that Cathy and Barry bought their painting from Chancellor's auctioneers. Chancellor's auctioneers ceased trading in the 1990s, and there are no surviving records at all. And when it comes to the back of the picture, there's nothing on it, not a single label.
So we've got a picture without a paper trail?
It looks that way. What we can do is go back to Catalogue Raisonné, 1874. And what that shows us is Time of War presented to the nation by R. Vernon Esquire.
So he obviously owned the painting. So who was he? I think what we're going to have to do is, rather than work back from Cathy and Barry, we're going to have to work forward in time from R. Vernon, Esquire.
And if we could prove that Cathy Barry's picture was one and the same as that, well, that would be job done, wouldn't it?
Our hunt for the owner of Landseer's lost masterpiece, Time of War, has led us to Horse Guards.
It's a pretty beautiful entrance, isn't it?
Gorgeous.
The stables here are home to the Queen's official bodyguard, the Household Cavalry. We've discovered that Landseer's lost painting and the man who owned it have close connections to these soldiers, and also to a defining moment in British history. Peter Storer, curator of the Household Cavalry Museum and a former Royal Horse Guard himself, is going to tell us more.
Hello, Fiona.
Hi, Peter.
Hi, Peter.
Good to see you. So, Cathy, the reason I brought you here is that our investigations into the past life of the lost Landseer has brought us to this man. This is Robert Vernon, and he is the first person to have owned what you hope is your painting, Landseer's War. Fine-looking gentleman, isn't he?
Yes, very much so.
Now, the reason he's the first person to have owned it is because he commissioned it from Landseer in 1846. And he has a direct connection to these horses. He amassed a huge fortune by supplying horses to the British Army for the Napoleonic Wars. Peter, you're a former member of the Royal Horse Guard yourself, and he would have supplied, what, thousands of horses?
Tens of thousands. Tens of thousands. I mean, certainly on the battlefield at Waterloo in 1815, there was something like 60,000 horses on the battlefield on that one day.
60,000?
So we're talking thousands.
Well, let's look at the painting and try and decipher what we can see here. So, Peter, you're the man to help us do that.
The soldier on the right is a trooper in the Royal Horse Guards known as the Blues. The uniform he's wearing there is virtually identical to the uniform our colleague here on the right on the black horse. If you look on the picture, you can clearly see his cuirasses, the breastplate. You can clearly see the crossbelt, the white crossbelt, and the red flash cord, the white gauntlets, and the helmet, the Albert pattern helmet down there with the red plume, is identical to the helmet that's worn today.
It can't be very comfortable.
It certainly doesn't look it. What about the soldier under the grey?
He's a trumpeter, and he's the direct equivalent of our colleague here on the left. You can't really see much of the uniform, but you can see his trumpet with the trumpet banner. And he would be riding the grey horse because he was the commanding officer's means of communication on the battlefield. And when the CO gave an order, charge, walk, trot, turn left, turn right, he would have blown the relevant call on his trumpet, and the rest of the regiment would have reacted to that call.
20,000 horses and nearly 50,000 men died at Waterloo. Landseer's bloody battle scene clearly held great meaning for the man who commissioned it. And it was a message Robert Vernon wished to share, because in 1847 he gifted the painting, along with his entire art collection, to the nation.
So we have here a record from the National Gallery of his paintings. And it says here, on the 22nd of December, 1847, a collection of 157 pictures was presented by deed of gift to the trustees by Mr. Robert Vernon. And that art collection had some of the greats of British art in there. So if you look at the names, we've got Sir Joshua Reynolds, Gainsborough, Rumney, Constable, and then all the way down at number 414 is the painting you hope is yours.
Oh, fantastic.
Landseer's War, just below peace.
Yes. He amassed all that and gave it to the British people. It's fantastic.
And not only that, if your picture is the original Landseer, it hung in some of the finest and most prestigious galleries in the land. So in 1850, it hung in Marlborough House, a former royal residence.
Yes.
It then went on to hang in what was known at the time as Kensington Museum, now known as the Victoria and Albert Museum,
Yes.
of course. From there, the National Gallery in Trafalgar Square,
Yes.
and finally ending up with the Tate at Millbank, where it went in 1900. And we know it hung there until 1928 and the flood. So the question is, what happened to it after that?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it, Fiona?
which at the moment I can't answer.
The trail of Landseer's time of war now leads us to the night of January the 7th, 1928, when London suffered one of the worst disasters in its history. The combination of melting snow, heavy rainfall, a spring tide, and a storm surge out of the North Sea caused a massive torrent of water to gush down the Thames. It must have been like a tidal wave, and you can see the damage that was caused. It crashed through the embankment wall. Look at the wreckage here, smashing the wall to pieces, destroying the road, and of course rushing into the buildings on either side. And it was the working class families that lived alongside the river that suffered the most. Look at this family here, standing surveying the wreckage of their home, but at least they survived. And this is terrifying. Lowering this tiny child down into the outstretched arms of the man perching precariously on what looks like a door. Others were not so lucky. There's a heartbreaking newspaper report from the time. Amazing floods in London, it says, a heavy death toll. Several persons trapped in basements. So 14 people were unable to escape and they drowned, and 4,000 were left homeless. With the embankment wall destroyed, there was nothing to stop the torrent of water flooding the lower galleries of the Tate. Staff spent 12 hours trying to rescue hundreds of masterpieces from the National Collection. You can see these two men wading through what must have been freezing water, and I think they're coming out of that door just behind me there. Look at these guys, all four of them, more, 5 of them, lugging this huge painting. It must have been just a desperate effort, though, a race against time to get these pictures out of the water. And here they are, propped up against the wall. I mean, just here, where I'm standing, the finest of Britain's collection of art, just stuck up against a wall. We know that Landseer's original time of war was in the basement gallery here at the Tate. So what kind of state was it in when one of these men finally managed to rescue it?
So are there any signs of flood damage on Cathy and Barry's picture? To find out, we need to examine the work forensically, so I've sent it to the Courtauld Institute. Professor Aviva Bernstock is one of the world's leading authorities in the scientific study of art. Her research could provide crucial evidence to prove whether this picture is a long-lost work by Landseer or an imposter by another hand.
Hello, Aviva.
Oh, hello.
So, what are your first thoughts on this?
Well, I think it's a very nicely painted picture, very skillfully done. Particularly the horses' heads, they're really fantastic.
So what about the condition of the picture?
Well, that's one of the problems, and there are some obvious condition issues which make the composition quite hard to see, actually, in passages. So the painting has had some damage, and it's been lined onto a new piece of canvas using a wax resin adhesive, and you can see that oozing out around the sides here.
Yeah. Okay, so the actual canvas has been cut off the stretcher and put onto a new canvas.
Yeah, it was a method that was used from the 1920s onwards to prevent moisture ingress into paintings or to slow it down.
Could it have been done in response to water damage?
It may well have been water damage. I mean, you can see there are other signs that the painting's been affected by changes in moisture conditions.
Can I use a torch just to have a close look? So,
yeah. Can you see that the paint is cupping up?
I can.
So at some point there were moisture fluctuations or changes in environmental conditions to which the painting was exposed, and that's what caused the cupping.
And could all of that have been caused by a flood?
Difficult to say if it was caused by a flood, but certainly there's evidence that it was exposed to moisture at some time.
I need to find out what happened to the paintings that were caught in the Tate flood. A total of 226 oils were submerged, and in the immediate aftermath, damage assessments were made. I've got some copies of documents here from the Tate archive, and they all relate to pictures that were caught up in the flood of 1928. The first one is just a hastily written report, but intriguingly, it's like a kind of triage system of damage to these paintings, a bit like you would people coming into a hospital. So category A is the least serious, slight damage or none. And Landseer's War is not in there. Category B, rather damaged but easily repaired. And our painting is not there. Category C, this is damage beyond repair. And down this list, you've got Landseer Peace and Landseer War. So Landseer's War is recorded as damage beyond repair. But what became of it in the months after the flood? This is a final revised list, September 1928. Ruined by flood. That's not a great word, is it? Ruined. And there is Landseer's War. So step forward in time to 1935, and I've got a report from the Tate. It says the director was authorised to destroy the remains of certain pictures which had been damaged beyond repair in the flood of 1928. To destroy them. But then what it doesn't say is which pictures were they? Was Landseer's War among them? It's just so odd. If it was destroyed, how was it destroyed? When was it destroyed? Surely there would be a record of that. I find it very strange that there wouldn't be. So what happened to Landseer's War?
Back at the Courtauld Institute, Aviva is continuing her technical study of Cathy Barry's picture. She's using imaging techniques to show what the eye can't see. Infrared and X-ray photography can penetrate through the layers of darkened varnish and paint to reveal hidden clues. This should enable us to detect any further signs of damage, possibly flood damage.
So this is the infrared image, which shows you what's beneath the darkened varnish. And what you see underneath are those dark spots all over the horse's back, which are old restoration paints, presumably applied to cover up damages to the paint.
Yeah. It's interesting also that you can see a little bit more of the saddle and the boot. The infrared is revealing a little bit that the eye couldn't see.
We're now going a layer deeper with the X-ray image.
Crikey. Look at the energy in that picture that you couldn't really see with the naked eye, that hurricane of strokes in the background.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very energetic use of lead white containing paint around the horse's head to shape it into exactly the right shape.
And doing it in this sort of rather dangerous, explorative way is not surely the way a copyist, someone who's replicating another work, is going to do it.
Yes, it would be very difficult to mimic the style that's so freely painted.
So what can you tell us about the condition from this?
On the lower right-hand corner, you can see there's quite a lot of thick, dense, white-looking areas, which look uncharacteristic of the rest of the painting, and I think they've been put on to disguise some kind of damage underneath.
But there's definite evidence that something has happened to this picture and that repair has been required.
That's what it looks like, yes.
Across London, I'm heading to the National Gallery. I've been trying to find out what happened to Landseer's time of war after the flood of 1928. It was among 18 paintings listed as damaged beyond repair. But I recognise one work among these pictures, The Execution of Lady Jane Grey. It's a painting by Paul de la Roche. And as you can see, it's far from ruined. Curator Chris Riopel has agreed to tell me about the resurrection of this monumental work. Hi Chris, good to see you.
Hello Fiona, welcome.
And standing before this sumptuous painting, how is it that, according to several lists in the Tate, it was either damaged beyond repair, completely spoiled, or even destroyed? So what's it doing here?
Well, this great flood of 1928, all of a sudden they were faced with an overwhelming crisis. What to save first? The most important things were the works by Turner. And I think that the decision was made that all the effort had to go into rescuing the Turners from the water, and less important things would be put aside. And when things get put aside, they get forgotten.
So this was just forgotten about then, was it?
It was forgotten about from 1928 to 1973, when a young researcher went in to the Tate Conservation Studios, saw a number of rolled up pieces of canvas, and just asked, could we unroll that? 2 pictures were in it, one by the great English painter John Martin, and with it rolled up this picture.
So this was just rolled up, sort of tucked away somewhere for 40-odd years?
Yes. Yes, and repeatedly reported as no longer existing. And in fact, its condition, we have the photograph from it, its condition is not all that bad at all. There are tears here and there, but very far from destroyed.
Very far from destroyed. I mean, looking at that, there is no way you would describe that as completely spoiled, damaged beyond repair. So why on earth did they say that at the time? I find that absolutely gobsmacking.
Yes, perhaps one of the reasons is that Paul Delaroche, the artist, in the 1830s, was one of the most famous painters in the world. By 1900, he was almost utterly forgotten. And so there must have been no great energy to put effort into saving this picture at that moment. And in fact, in one of the lists, they say that the works destroyed were of no aesthetic interest whatsoever.
And so a painting like this was considered of no aesthetic value whatsoever?
Aesthetically, they didn't see the importance of it, so they seem just to have rolled it up with other pictures and turned their attentions elsewhere.
All this is making me wonder then if the Landseer we're looking at, which was also described as damaged in the flood, in fact, like this painting, wasn't that badly damaged, but was kind of tucked away and just forgotten about because no one valued it. Aesthetically, they didn't really rate it.
This may very well be the case, that Landseer's popularity had diminished as well, and decisions had to be made, and it was pushed aside.
And so maybe, what, passed it on?
Yes, yes.
Sold
to a
it,
student,
I don't know.
Maybe you can learn something from this.
And therefore, the painting that we are investigating could be one and the same painting that was listed as being damaged in the floods.
Stranger things have happened. And this is the living proof that a picture can come back to life.
It seems extraordinary, doesn't it, that a painting like Lady Jane Grey would just be rolled up and forgotten about it. You can't imagine that happening today. But, you know, the Tate back then wasn't the powerhouse in the art world that it is now, and they just didn't have the means or the resources to conserve all the paintings damaged in the flood, and inevitably, some fell by the wayside, even a painting like Lady Jane Grey.
Back in Edinburgh, Aviva has come to the Scottish National Gallery on an evidence-gathering mission. To determine whether Cathy and Barry's picture is the work of Landseer or a copy by another hand, we need to compare the pigments with known works by the artist. The gallery has agreed to let Aviva study Landseer's The Monarch of the Glen.
It's really a massive treat to be here in the gallery, having the painting taken down, especially for us to look at. It's fantastic.
Landseer's most famous masterpiece has been valued at £8 million. A team of specialist art handlers ensure it's safely off the wall.
Of course, they have to be really careful because the paintings are very heavy and, you know, one slip could be a disaster.
Aviva can now get to work to discover what this masterpiece is made of.
What I'm using today is an X-ray fluorescence spectrometer, and it's a technique of non-invasively, so it doesn't damage the painting at all, looking at the elements in the pigments, and from that we can identify the pigments with luck and compare them to the painting that we're investigating.
This data will allow Aviva to go back in time to the very ingredients he used to make this masterpiece.
Back in London, I've come to the Tate Gallery. I keep finding that works recorded as destroyed in the flood have since turned up. John Martin's The Destruction of Pompeii was rediscovered in the 70s, badly damaged, but not destroyed. Thanks to the painstaking work of Tate conservators, it's now been extensively restored. I'm hoping conservation manager Jane McCree can help me make sense of these conflicting records.
What's so intriguing about this painting is not only its magnificence, obviously, but in this Tate catalogue from the 1950s, it is described as a work destroyed and omitted from the catalogue. But we now know that just wasn't true. It was actually forgotten about.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if that could be the case with art. I mean, how can that happen?
First of all, there wasn't a conservation department here at Tate in the 20s. It didn't come into existence until the 50s. In the 70s, the department grew, and I think there was then the opportunity to re-look at these paintings that were listed, as you say, omitted from the collection.
Records from the Tate suggest that some pictures recorded as destroyed in the flood had been written off too hastily.
In this list here, there's a note written in 1970, found only slightly damaged and re-entered into the collection. And here we have the damage and the restored painting.
Yeah, and I think different eyes at different points in history make different decisions, I guess, but with a modern take, that to me is repairable.
So all this makes me wonder, of course, as if the original Landseer wall wasn't damaged beyond repair, and it wasn't destroyed, in fact. Have you got any records of it at all?
We don't have a conservation record for war. We do, however, have a record from peace, which is its companion painting.
So that's this document here?
Yes.
Nothing can be done. There is no painting except the original canvas support, 2 exclamation marks, destroyed in flood of 1928.
And if you look at another Landseer painting that was damaged in the flood, The Maid and the Magpie, which visualises that damage, you can see very clearly that nothing remains but the canvas and a few fragments of paint.
That is slightly horrifying, I must say.
And we have an archival book that was found in the Conservation Archive.
And this was written when?
The catalogue's from 1937 to 38.
So we've got peace, finished in flood, then we've got war, destroyed in flood, and then it says finished in flood.
It feels quite finite, indicating perhaps nothing remains of them.
I mean, surely there has to be a chance, doesn't there? Given you've got no record of it, but we know that works that were listed as destroyed were not destroyed. There has to be some kind of chance, doesn't there, that it still exists somewhere?
Personally, I don't think so, and I don't think the evidence points in that way from our Tate archive. It's unlikely, I think.
We need a body, though, Jane, that's the thing. You know, I mean, without an actual body, it's hard to let go of this completely.
Back at the gallery, the plot thickens.
I understand why the Tate feels that it's very unlikely that Landseer's time of war survived the flood. I mean, that word finished is pretty damning, isn't it? But I've been looking closely at the conservation records, and look what I found. There's a listing here of a painting by Lance George called Fruit Piece. See that word there? Finished. But look at this, found in the 1970s. This is Fruit Piece. Now you can see the damage up here, but finished? Because look at it now, fully restored and back in the Tate collection. It's so frustrating. I know these records are from a long time ago, but paintings that were described as finished weren't finished. Some paintings that were described as destroyed haven't been destroyed. I just really want some physical evidence as to what happened to Landseer's time of war. And without that, I haven't got a body. And so there's just a little part of me that thinks maybe it did survive after all.
Back at the Courtauld Institute, Aviva is trying to identify what Kathy and Barry's picture is painted with. Tiny samples taken from areas of damage can reveal the paint layers and the pigments present. Aviva is also using X-ray fluorescence to analyse other areas of the picture. But will the paints be correct for the period and in keeping with Landseer's palette?
Hi, Aviva.
Hi.
So, would I be right in thinking this is a particularly busy, complex time for ingredients of paint?
Yeah, absolutely. In the 19th century, it was the development of inorganic chemistry, and as a consequence, there are a whole lot of new pigments which were being invented all the time.
We certainly don't want to find anything that was invented post-1846 when we know that the original painting, A Time of War, was done.
Absolutely.
Let's see if the blues are right or wrong for the date.
This is a part of the blue painted banner, which you can see actually on the screen here, is made using a mixture of Prussian blue, which was invented in 1700 but used shortly after, and some cobalt blue that was first made in the early part of the 19th century.
So far, so good. Nothing that was invented post-1846. What about the white in the horse's head?
This is painted using lead white, which has been used for thousands of years by artists for painting. It's highly toxic and you can't buy it now. It wouldn't pass health and safety standards.
Will the reds of the soldiers' uniforms sound alarm bells?
This is painted using a mixture of vermilion, which is mixed with iron oxide. Both pigments have been used for a very long time.
All time-honoured, all around in 1846.
Absolutely.
And finally, the greens of the leaves.
What you can see here is the greens painted with a mixture of chrome green and some emerald green. They're all early 19th century pigments.
This is real progress, isn't it? There are no red flags. There is nothing in this painting that was not around when Landseer painted the original in 1846.
No, that's right. They're all absolutely right for the period.
Armed with data on the pigments in the Monarch of the Glen and cross-sections from other genuine Landseers, Aviva can now make a comparison with our picture.
This is a cross-section taken from a brown area of paint, and on the right is from a genuine Landseer in the Tate, and you can see the cross-section below, which has a really similar layer structure. So you have the first layer, which is chalk and lead white, and then a more opaque layer, in both cases, of lead white to give that white priming that the artist painted on. And then on top, you've got a couple of paint layers which contain very closely similar types of pigments. So they're quite closely similar in materials and technique.
Well, I find that rather encouraging. So just to be clear, everything that you have shown us is what we would expect to find in an original work by Landseer.
Well, that might be true, but you have to bear in mind that at this time, other artists working may have used the same combination of pigments.
No, that's just you being the typically cautious scientist, but I still can't help feeling this is progress.
Back at the gallery, new evidence has come to light. We've discovered something in the Tate archives that could be a game changer.
Now, I know I said I wanted to find a body. Ta-da! I have found one. Now, this is admittedly before the flood of 1928, but this is a photograph of Landseer's original time of war.
But I mean, that's a properly early photograph. Must be 1880s, 1890s.
And what do you think when you compare it to Cathy and Barry's picture?
I mean, that's really interesting to see, because at first glance they look extraordinarily close. But there are details that don't quite match.
Like the smoke, you mean? I'd noticed that.
Yes, but the smoke might be explainable because there had been damage in that area.
And what about when you go in closer, like this area, for example?
You see, I find that more worrying because, I mean, just look at the difference in detail. Look at the handle of the sword in the photograph, that lovely sort of row of highlights. They're just not there in Cathy and Barry's.
And then, what about here, the horse's mane?
Yeah.
Areas of concern here as well, aren't there?
You see more detail in the photograph. There's more modelling, more highlight.
I mean, these are subtle differences we're talking about. Does it mean that Cathy and Barry's picture is not one and the same with this photograph?
Not necessarily. I mean, photography was very different in those days. There was a lot of different processes, manipulations that could possibly explain some of the things that we're looking at here. The photograph has raised some concerns, so I need to understand how the image was produced. During the late 19th century, printed reproductions of artworks began to be replaced by photography. Hamstengel was an art publishing house that pioneered this. In 1894, they began a 2-year project to photograph works in the National Gallery, including Time of War. I've sent the image to photography historian Anthony Hamber so he can lend his expert eye. Now, I've been looking at this photograph because, of course, the thing I'm absolutely hoping is that our painting is going to be one and the same. But the more I look, the more I'm encountering things that worry me. So how could those differences be explained?
Well, there were still major issues around capturing all the colours and all the brightness and darknesses in a painting.
By comparing a modern image of this work by van der Weyden to a 19th century photograph, it's clear to see the limitations of early art photography.
If we look at the detail on that standing figure...
On the coat,
On the coat, and we go back to the amount of detail...
It's gone.
It's gone. So retouching of the negative was very common practice. And here we have a photograph of a retoucher at work.
So this is airbrushing in the 19th century?
It is. The retoucher is actually scratching off using a scalpel off the negative. She could use a paintbrush and put on chemicals or paints on it. She could use pencils on it.
So looking at this photograph, it's not necessarily as reliable as we might imagine.
Well, yes, the differences are partly because of the level of retouching and also the state of the painting that is in not the same condition it was photographed.
Retouching of the photographic negative, along with damage and overpaint on our painting, might explain some of the subtle differences. But can Anthony see through these issues to find similarities?
The piece of metalwork, I'm not quite sure what it is on the left-hand side.
It's a blown-up frame of a window.
The horse's head, the white horse's head, and the bridle on that. And also, I think, the heads of the two figures, if they're not too overpainted.
Anthony has also noticed a particular anomaly on the canvas edge.
If we look down the left-hand side, we can see that there is a kink towards the bottom. And below that kink, the canvas is slightly wider than the rest of the painting on that side.
I can see exactly what you're pointing out.
Does Kathy and Barry's picture also have a kink on its edge?
Well, I never. It's definitely broader here. There is no doubt about it. Now, that's fascinating.
Is this evidence that could link our picture to the photograph?
Bringing to bear your experience of photography of this period, do you think that this could be one and the same as the photograph of the lost painting?
I do, for several reasons. You have the kink, and then you have the fine detail in other areas. And I do not believe a forger, a copyist, would go to that level of detail or would even be technically capable of replicating it.
Well, that's a very exciting observation.
Before we submit Kathy and Barry's picture to the Landseer Authority, I want to give it the best chance. I worry that its condition might hold it back, so I've sent it to conservator Rebecca Gregg for cleaning and restoration. The picture is covered with surface dirt and darkened varnish, with areas of crude overpaint. We can't begin to get a sense of the true quality unless we take these layers away.
These are always the most tense but also exciting moments in the process of trying to reveal a lost piece of art. Now, the question is, can Rebecca remove those later layers of varnish and dirt and paint in order to reveal beneath something of sufficient quality and also of condition to make this a work by Sir Edwin Landseer?
The solvent is beginning to bite now. You're now able to see through the discoloured varnish, the yellow, rather overcast layer in the background. It's almost as if sun is shining through the clouds. Some of the discoloration and varnish is now coming off the forelock, the little quiff on the top of the horse. Before, that whole area was solid, but now you can see a little chink of light coming through, exactly as you can in the photograph. I think that overpaint now is beginning to be removed. It's not just varnish. I can see hair and mane flowing and relating to the background a little bit more clearly. You can begin to see and feel passages that before were just invisible. With a layer of varnish and overpaint removed from half the picture, we can see the process is producing some striking results. Once the restoration is finished, the painting will be submitted to the Landseer Authority.
The day has come to find out if Kathy and Barry's picture is a genuine work by Sir Edwin Landseer. There are quite a few things that are looking really rather good for Kathy and Barry's picture now. We've managed to establish that it is exactly the same dimensions as the original Landseer Time of War, thought to have been destroyed in the flood. And also other paintings that were thought to have been destroyed in 1928 in that great flood have turned up decades later. So it's possible that Landseer's Time of War wasn't destroyed either. The only thing is, we have no provenance to link Kathy and Barry's picture back to the original Landseer. Literally none. And that is undoubtedly a problem.
This picture does have a lot going for it. The X-ray has shown a sort of explorative process beneath the surface. Not surely the way a copyist, someone who's replicating another work, is going to do it. And there are no rogue pigments there to suggest a later hand. A leading photography historian says that in his view it's one and the same picture as the original that was photographed in the 1890s. The cleaning has been a mixed blessing, and there's definite quality there. But there are some areas also which are not as good as I would hope. Now, it may be that these are just condition issues, but my concern is that that might hamper our chances.
Kathy's come to the gallery to discover whether her painting has been accepted as a genuine work by Sir Edwin Landseer. Barry joins us from Florida.
So, behind this sheet is your picture. It is now cleaned and it has been restored. Here it is.
Wow, my goodness.
Wow.
It's beautiful. It's come up so well.
Now that the layers of varnish, dirt and overpaint have been removed, the painting is both brighter and clearer.
You can see things you couldn't before?
Oh, heavens, yes.
I mean, I think altogether it's been a very successful clean. I think an area that I would have liked to have improved more is around about the saddle. It may well be as a result of damage, but it hasn't quite transformed as much as I would like. Having said that, there are other areas of the picture which are now all the more appealing.
Absolutely the case, yes.
Landseer Authority Richard Ormond has examined the picture and our dossier of evidence. We're about to find out his decision. So I've got here the verdict of your painting in this envelope. I mean, there's a lot to play for with this picture, isn't there?
So if this were just a mere copy of a work by Landseer, it would be worth £2,000, £3,000, possibly £4,000 as a decorative picture. But as a Landseer, we would be talking £80,000, possibly more. But I have to say, if you could prove this were by Landseer, you would be giving the nation back one of the great treasures. This was a highly popular image, and it disappeared.
Well,
here we go.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Ready as I'll ever be.
You're sounding nervous now.
I'm a bit shaky.
Having reviewed the evidence, I have come to the conclusion that the painting Time of War is not by Sir Edwin Landseer. I'm really sorry. Oh, it's gutting, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Does it give any indication of why or?
Well, it goes on to say, the picture lacks the artist's spirited brushwork. It is summarily painted in the details, and it presents a flat, rather bland surface. That's a bit harsh. Nevertheless, it is of better quality than the average Landseer copy.
I'm glad you said that, because I've always maintained that this is a work of notable quality.
Richard Ormond writes that there's not enough flood damage on the picture, and though the pigments are compatible with genuine Landseers, they're not unique to the artist. In his opinion, differences between the photograph and the painting can't be explained by the print processes of the time. It's so disappointing. But certainly Richard Ormond, and he is the man when it comes to Landseer, he's absolutely categorical it's not.
I am a little disappointed. one can't argue if he is a Landseer man.
You know, obviously there's an element of disappointment. There has to be crass to say there isn't.
To me, when I bought it, I didn't know what it was. I just knew it was well done, and I liked it.
And do you still like it, having been through this process and now
Yes,
finding
I
out
love
it's
it.
not a Landseer?
Now that it's been cleaned, it's even better.
Well, I'm so sorry we couldn't deliver you the magic name, and you can now keep on enjoying your painting.
Yes.
In your own home.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
There's still a little part of me that wonders, where is Landseer's Time of War? But anyway, we know now that it is not Kathy and Barry's painting.
But I think they need to hang on to the fact that even if it's not by Landseer, it is a work of quality. And there are aspects of it that are almost as good as Landseer himself. And if I were them, I would be proud to have it on my wall.
42 million.
The art world, where paintings change hands for fortunes.
Sold. Thank you very much.
But for every known masterpiece, there may be another still waiting to be discovered.
This is it.
International art dealer Philip Mould and I have teamed up to hunt for lost works by great artists. We use old-fashioned detective work and state-of-the-art science to get to the truth.
Science can enable us to see beyond the human eye.
Oh, my goodness.
Every case is packed with surprise and intrigue.
Is it, or isn't it a Freud then?
But not every painting is quite what it seems.
Gosh, why didn't I notice that before?
It's a journey that can end in joy.
There is enough to support the conclusion that it is by Tom Roberts.
Or bitter disappointment.
I don't think it's a work by Gauguin. I'm very sorry.
In this episode, a Welsh farmer turned art hunter. Is this how you pass the sort of long nights of lambing when you're waiting for the next one to arrive? Discovers that not all that glitters is gold.
So has been made to deceive?
Can our investigation prove that a painting found on eBay is really a lost work for King George III?
I'm going to be looking at this painting probably for more hours than anyone since the artist painted it.
We draw together the worlds of art and forensic science.
It would be the first time in Fatal Fortune that human remains helped us with an attribution.
To try and help this amateur art sleuth prove he's found a lost treasure. Just remind us, what did you buy it for on eBay?
Oh, here.
Our Fatal Fortune investigations have taken us to some beautiful locations across the world. This time, we've been called to Anglesey, at the northern tip of Wales, somewhere both I and Philip know well. Well, it's great to be back in North Wales. I used to come here as a child on holiday.
Gosh, I spent ages down here as a kid. In fact, the high point was when I entered the Clanfestiniog fancy dress competition as John Lennon.
And did you win?
Unfortunately, runner-up only. I broke my circular glasses.
We're here at the request of farmer Hugh Lewis. Far from the high-end galleries and auction houses Philip's more familiar with, Hugh hunts for art treasures online. We're here to talk about Hugh's paintings, which he bought on eBay, which is a pretty bold move given how many fakes we've discovered out there.
Well, that's a pastime riven with risk, but I'm intrigued to know what he's turned up.
As COVID restrictions stop us meeting in the farmhouse, we've been offered sanctuary in the local church.
Hello, Hugh.
Hello. Hi.
Very nice to meet you.
And very nice to meet you as well.
We've arranged to look at some of Hugh's paintings. I've never dared buy paintings on eBay. Furniture, yes, but paintings, no. And I'm immediately reminded of how shark-infested these waters can be.
This is classic buying online territory. You've been taken in by a painting that was designed to look like an oil painting, but isn't.
OK, so that's one dream crushed. Well done, Philip.
The date of the painting, I'm afraid it's not as it should be.
Yeah, that's really disappointing.
This is a classic trapper in that way. We call them trappers,
Yeah.
you know, and they take your eye, you get excited, deal done, you bring it home, and Bob's not your uncle.
Little knowledge is a dangerous thing, perhaps.
Despite the setbacks, Hugh has another picture he's particularly excited about.
This is a painting of the Last Supper.
Ah.
I saw it online, and you can see the oil sketch underneath, which is really quite well done.
The Last Supper, big subject.
This is one of the most recognizable scenes in Western art. Christ at the center, his apostles reacting to the shocking news that he will soon die. The bread and the wine, familiar symbols of his sacrifice. And Judas, shown wrestling with the decision to betray his master. And Hugh's research extends to a possible artist.
I believe it's Benjamin West. He started painting in America, and then he came to this country.
Benjamin West claimed he first learned to paint when Native Americans showed him how to mix pigments from mud. After leaving America and settling in Britain, success followed quickly, and he became one of the most famous artists of the 18th century. The bold storytelling of his paintings captivated London. Crowds queued to see his canvases filled with moments of drama and high emotion. And his biggest fan was King George III, painted here by West. He made West his official history painter, and together they aimed to bring about a magnificent new era in British art. During the 20th century, many of West's works left Britain and are now in the museums and galleries of America. I wonder what makes Hugh think that this rather dark and damaged-looking painting could be an overlooked West.
Someone's had a bit of a go at it with what looks like a Brillo pad down the bottom.
So there's real quality there. The condition, you're right, a bit problematic. But if we could attach the name Benjamin West to it,
yeah.
I mean, that, from an art historical point of view, from a commercial point of view, is worth having.
So how much did you pay for it, Hugh?
Well, it was advertised online for £50 as a starting bid, and nobody bid, so I got it for the original price of £50, which is amazing, really.
Well, 50 quid is a heartening starting point, Hugh. If this is right, I suspect, you know, to someone who feels attached to this type of artist subject matter, £30,000, possibly more.
Sounds interesting. It's good.
Buy a lot of sheep with that, Hugh.
Yes, yes, yes.
I want to take a moment to get to know this painting. There's a lot that really intrigues me about Hugh's picture. I was brought up a Catholic. I was an altar boy across the border in Liverpool, and I'm used to this image, this story narrated in the New Testament pictorially, but not quite like this. There's a sort of journalistic energy to this composition. Christ is in the middle, but then the disciples are grouped on the left and the right. They're huddled, they're discussing, they're talking. And then there's the technique itself. There's a sort of softness, a sort of rather burnished quality. Look how the painter has modulated the composition. So your eye goes from light to dark. The Italians have a word for it, chiaroscuro. But the other point is, though, this is not a fully resolved painting. It's work in progress, work that is, I think, unquestionably a sketch. But despite the fact that there's so much going for it, there are aspects of this painting that worry me. There are areas. They've been scrubbed, got at by some failed restoration process. I find that a bit disturbing. One thing that's also slightly worrying is I cannot see a signature. Now, West was one of those artists who he was a self-promoter, he just loved leaving his signature on things. I would like to have found that. That would have been quite reassuring, like a sort of hallmark on a piece of silver. That would have been rather useful. And perhaps I shouldn't be motivated in so simplistic a way, but wouldn't it be wonderful to turn a £50 eBay purchase into a genuine work by Benjamin West.
I want to know if you can throw any light on who owned his painting before.
What did you manage to find out about the provenance of the painting?
Well, the seller did say that the painting had been in storage for 60 years and it belonged to his wife's father. Previously, it belonged to an old woman in a big house who paid it in lieu of a debt for some building work the family had done for them.
And whereabouts in the country was all this going on?
Surrey.
In Surrey?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And that's as far back as the seller was able to take it for you?
Yes.
So what we've got with the provenance then is you've got the seller who lived in Surrey.
Yep.
It had been in storage for 60 years.
Yes.
He and his wife had inherited it from his wife's father.
Yep.
And the father got it.
For payment for a building job.
Right. And instead of getting money, got this painting.
Yes. The family thought it was worthless.
So it might turn out that the painting that they thought was worthless, actually, you with your eye, have found something that could be very valuable. We don't know, but it could be.
Yeah, hopefully. I did message him after buying the painting, and he said, well, if it's worth $1 million, please don't tell me, is all he said. But he was quite good-humoured about it, so that's nice of him.
Philosophical, perhaps?
Oh, yeah. There's some work to be done, I think.
Well, that's what we're here for.
Yes.
To do that work.
Yeah.
And if we do manage to transform your eBay bargain buy into a Benjamin West, do you think you'll sell it? Do you think you'll hang on to it?
Well, things like this can be life-changing, or at least help. Farming is a very precarious industry at the moment.
So it'd be pretty handy.
Oh, yes. It'll probably be sold if it's genuine.
Well, fingers crossed then.
Yes, fingers crossed.
To begin my investigation into Hugh's painting, I'm heading to another church, slightly larger this time, the Chapel of St. Peter and Paul in Greenwich. I need to find out more about West and whether the Last Supper was a subject he ever painted. To help with my research, I've arranged to meet Desmond Shaw Taylor. Desmond, hello.
Good to see you.
He's the most recent surveyor of the Queen's pictures, a position West once held in the court of George III. We're meeting in front of the only West work still hanging in the space it was made for, a painting of St. Paul shipwrecked. This is an epic work, isn't it, Desmond?
Benjamin West specialised in full-scale figure paintings in the great tradition of Raphael and Michelangelo. I think what he sort of adds, not perhaps you can't add much to Raphael and Michelangelo, but his particular take on it, I think, are these very abrupt transitions from light to dark. You can see particularly that area of light in the centre of the composition, which you can't actually see the fire, but you can see the light of the fire, so you see these shapes in dramatic silhouette.
It's certainly stunning to see that. I mean, and trying to relate it to the little sketch that we've got. I just want to ask you some questions about that. So, Desmond, what we're looking at is a possible Benjamin West sketch for Last Supper.
Last Supper? Good. There are actually two paintings of the Last Supper by Benjamin West for George III. Two really important commissions at Windsor. And the first is a new-built chapel, a chapel of revealed religion. And basically it was going to tell the entire story of the Christian religion from beginning to end.
Very grand.
Very grand. And its high altar was going to look like that. The Last Supper, sitting on the altar table as Last Suppers should, because it is about the communion wafer and the wine.
And what happened to that?
Never built. Project entirely abandoned.
So George III commissioned Benjamin West to paint a Last Supper for this new chapel at Windsor, which then never got built. The painting was painted, but clearly was never hung there.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned two Last Suppers. What about the other one?
Other one. It was created for St. George's Chapel at Windsor.
And that definitely does exist. I mean, that's where Harry and Meghan got married, and we all know it very well.
Absolutely. And I'm showing you here a watercolour of it. Exactly the same position, immediately over the altar table. And it was set off by huge stained glass above, also designed by Benjamin West, showing the resurrection of Christ.
So that's an intriguing start. There's not one, but two large-scale Benjamin West Last Suppers, both altarpiece paintings for King George III. So if Hugh's painting is genuine, it has to be a preparatory work for one of those. Our next job has to be to find those two large finished works.
The first one, made for the never-built Chapel Royal, is now in the stores of the Tate. Usually I'd be rushing to see it in the flesh, but COVID shutting down museums all over the world has meant that we have to rely on digital technology to make a comparison.
So what we now need to do is work out whether Hugh's little eBay sketch could in any way be preparatory for the Tate picture, this monumental 2 meters by 3 meters composition, and at first glance, a very, very similar concept, painting. It's the Last Supper. It's Christ at the center, a very sacred, significant, and much portrayed scene. And the light is rather similar, the sense of the tent and the moon, that strong drapery. So the question is, how does that compare to Hugh's sketch?
Well, I can see some similarities, but there are so many things that are different, Philip, that I just can't quite get past. So the figure of Judas is the really obvious one, because it's so dominant, isn't it, in Hugh's painting? He's there, big and brooding and tortured, right in the foreground, about to exit right. And I presume that's Judas sitting there on the right, is it, in that painting?
Mm. And I have to say, dare I say it? I prefer it in Hugh's sketch. Mm.
And then when I look at that Christ in Benjamin West's painting, he slightly looks like those kind of romantic princes in the Ladybird books I used to read as a child. You know, when you look at his face. And then you look at the one in Hugh's picture, and there is a very different face, isn't it? Older, with the weight of the world on his shoulders.
And I think you put your finger on it. There are some fundamental differences here. Your eye goes from the divine image of Christ through to the huddled, troubled one of Judas. Not necessarily with this one in the Tate. There are definitely similarities. There's the same sort of, the gene pool of thinking is the same, but no, it doesn't feel like one is the sketch for the other.
So we're decided. Hugh's painting can't be a sketch for the 1784 Royal Chapel altarpiece painting. We have to hope that the second one is a better match.
West may have been American, but he was at the heart of the British art establishment in the 18th century, and one of the founders of the Royal Academy. Although it, like the Tate, is closed to visitors, I'm being allowed access to their archives by curator Annette Wickham.
Hello, Fiona.
Hi, Annette. Nice to see you.
June.
Wow. That is a very striking picture, isn't it? West was one of the artists who successfully petitioned George III to establish the Royal Academy to promote the visual arts. Portrayed here in his president's hat, on his president's throne, West remains its longest-serving president, a position he held for 27 years. His name appears in decades' worth of exhibition records. I'm on the hunt for any entry that might refer to Hugh's painting. The first reference I can find to a Last Supper by Benjamin West is in 1784, and this is a list of paintings exhibited at the Royal Academy in that year. And we've got here, number 437, The Last Supper, a design for a picture for His Majesty's Chapel in Windsor Castle. That's the picture I looked at with Philip that's now in the Tate. And we don't think that Hugh's picture is a preparatory sketch for that Last Supper. But what is good to know is that Benjamin West was exhibiting his sketches. The next reference I can find is a bit of a jump ahead, all the way to 1804. Now here we've got The Last Supper, the original sketch for the great picture over the communion table in the Collegiate Church at Windsor. Now, I've done enough royal weddings in my time for the BBC to know that the Collegiate Church is the same as St. George's Chapel. So this, I think, is the sketch that we're interested in when it comes to Hugh's particular picture. And what's very frustrating is, although it shows it was exhibited, it has no information about its size, any dimensions at all, or any description of it. So that's encouraging and sort of frustrating in equal measure. And then finally, 1806, so another year on, again, sketch for the picture of the Last Supper, the altarpiece of St. George's Chapel, Windsor, Benjamin West. But no details, no dimensions. And is this the same sketch that was shown in a previous year? So that's at least one sketch for the Royal Chapel, and more promisingly, one, possibly two, for St. George's Chapel. The lack of description makes them too vague to identify as Hugh's. I wonder whether we know where those sketches are today, and if one of them could be Hugh's picture.
What we do know is that there are two sketches by West for his Last Supper, which have been identified and their whereabouts are known. One for St. George's Chapel, one for the chapel that was never built. But there is possibly a third sketch and hasn't been seen or recorded for over 100 years.
A missing Last Supper sketch?
That's right.
I like the sound of that.
Well, there are references to it from the works that West's sons inherited from him. Eventually, they started selling off the work.
Well, this is exciting. So it's possible, if it exists, it could be Hugh's picture.
It's possible.
So I need to find a record of that sale and see what I can dig out.
That's right.
Thanks, Annette.
You're welcome.
So now we know West produced sketches for his two Windsor altarpiece paintings. After a bit more digging, I found out that one for the Royal Chapel and one for St. George's Chapel both went to buyers in the United States in the 20th century. But what of the third possible sketch, not seen for over 100 years? Could Hugh have found that sketch?
A missing sketch is certainly intriguing. But I still need to be sure Hugh's picture is a preparatory work for a finished painting. I've located West's second altarpiece painting, the St. George's Chapel, Last Supper. Since 1980, it's been in America at the Detroit Institute of Arts, one of the world's great art collections, and a museum I'm familiar with. But with international travel prohibited, I've arranged to see it through curator Benjamin Coleman. Ben, hi there. Well, thank you for joining us in this funny way across the Atlantic.
It's always a pleasure to talk about Benjamin West, even if we need the magic of technology to make it possible right now.
I can see it behind you now. It is quite extraordinary. What a magnificent painting. What is also remarkable, and to me very satisfying, is I'm looking at the two, and those similarities are so resounding, really familiar signs that our sketch is so close to your epic work. The moon through the left-hand arch is a match. The disciples' groupings are the same. So too the cup and the bread. And most identifiably, Judas is glowering at us from the front of the painting in the same way. But, you know, I mean, we are dwarfed by yours. What a magnificent painting.
This painting has such a magnetic pull from across the room. It's the first painting that you see when you round the corner into this tremendous gallery of American art history paintings. The painting pulls you in from across the room. There's lots of contrast, lots of shadow. You know in half an instant who is bathed in a kind of virtuous golden light, who's cast in a sickly green shadow. You know who the good guy is and who the bad guy is.
So something I'm trying to get my head around, Ben, is how come ours is, although the same basic colours, so much softer, the light is so much gentler than in yours?
Thinking about Benjamin West as an artist who sometimes made different versions of a composition, he was very eclectic as a painter who experimented with different styles before he settled on finished work.
It could just be that Benjamin West is experimenting, is thinking of an alternative idea, a different mood for the Last Supper. There is, though, a less reassuring possibility. And what are the challenges in trying to prove a Benjamin West as authentic in your experience?
It's a big question. Certainly, we know that West had many students and many imitators. So it certainly doesn't seem unlikely that some of West's students or some of his admirers would have made copies after such a major commission as this Last Supper for the chapel at Windsor.
So Hugh's sketch is definitely related to the St. George's Chapel Last Supper. What we must now do is prove it's a genuine preparatory work by West himself.
I'm on the hunt for more information about this missing sketch, listed in the sale that West's sons held after their father's death. West was the highest paid painter of his time, and on his death in 1821, his two sons struggled to maintain the lifestyle they'd grown accustomed to. At the Paul Mellon Centre for Studies in British Art, I've got a copy of that 3-day sale. So in 1829, Benjamin West's sons had effectively a fire sale of all their dad's works. It was 180 pictures, and when you get to lot 21, what do we have? The study for the admired picture placed over the table of the altar of the choir of St. George's Chapel, Windsor. Now that is exciting, because if Hugh's picture is a study by Benjamin West, it's a study for St. George's Chapel. It describes it. This altarpiece was, and this is in italics because it's clearly particularly important, painted by command of His late Majesty, George III, of course. So they're throwing everything at selling this picture and making a big thing of that royal connection. Now, so far, I've managed to find out that Benjamin West did a number of Last Suppers, but I haven't had any dimensions. Here are some dimensions. So the Last Supper is 1 foot 2 inches wide, so that's 14 inches wide, and 10.5 inches high. So when you compare that to Hugh's picture is 15.5 inches wide and 11 inches high. So it's not exactly the same. There's about, an inch, half an inch in it. And if you think Hugh's picture is quite likely to have been relined a number of times, and that can change the shape of a picture. 230 years ago, it wasn't considered as critical to be that precise about measurements as it is now. So I know it's not exactly the same, but it's so close, so that's massively encouraging. The question is, did it sell? And if it sold, who bought it? This is an annotated version of the catalogue, and it has a list of the people who bought it. Nash. Now, when I think of Nash in the 1800s, the first name that comes to mind is John Nash, the celebrated architect who built much of Buckingham Palace, the finest buildings in Regency London. Is it John Nash who bought this picture? So what have we got? We've got a painting here that isn't exactly the same dimensions as Hugh's, but it certainly describes Hugh's, and the dimensions are as near as damn it. So there's a very strong possibility this is Hugh's picture we're seeing in this sale. And then a buyer, Nash. Could it be John Nash? That's what I need to look into next.
I'm keen to see what science can tell us about Hugh's picture. The surface of the painting is so dark and muddied, I can't help thinking that there's more to be revealed underneath. I've asked Professor Aviva Bernstock at the Courtauld Institute in London to take a look at it, and she's already intrigued.
Hi, Aviva. How are you getting on?
Hello. I haven't seen anything like this before. It's the first time that I've seen a sketch or a grisaille, a black and white picture that's partly painted.
Aviva's infrared imaging is able to penetrate the layers of varnish and paint to reveal the drawing lines below.
So you can see beneath that brownish coating, or the brownish coatings, to this sketch that's underneath, which looks like it's actually in 2 different sorts of black. This sort of fluid black, and also these hatchings, which are very detailed, which are done probably in a different sort of dry medium.
That's really thrilling, because you can see now there's this cross-hatching, this energy, this activity.
Well, there are quite a few workings out in the drawing stage. For example, you can see that Christ is now holding the bread, whereas he had it on the table beforehand in the sketch phase.
Oh, yes. So it's a sort of rolling, developing project, this.
Yeah. Hey, look, there's a hand. I didn't notice that before. Do you see that? Look, there's a hand and there's a knee.
Oh, my God, that's
look,
great.
So there's a lot of working out here.
Yes,
there's a lot more. There's a hand that goes down under the drapery, which isn't there because
yes.
he's now holding his hands up.
Yeah, fascinating.
And then there's the knee. So he's drawn naked underneath this robe.
Yeah. But what does look and feel really distinctive are those sort of impassioned lines and the way that the forms are coming out of this sort of thicket of pencil strokes.
I think it'd be very hard to imitate that. So if we saw it in another picture, firmly attributed to West, that would be quite good evidence of the similar hand.
So a characteristic of the artist, whoever that person may be.
To me, this looks like the free-flowing work of a truly accomplished artist, not a student or faker. But Aviva's right. We'll have to find another example by him in order to prove that this is Benjamin West.
I want to check back in with Philip and tell him where I've got to with the provenance. Well, let me show you what I found. I found records of the original sketch for St. George's Chapel. Have a look at this. Lot 21, The Last Supper. This is from a sale in 1829. The dimensions are almost identical to Hugh's picture. And look at the description. The study for the admired picture placed over the table of the altar of the choir of St. George's Chapel, Windsor. So I think there's a very good chance that is Hugh's picture.
Sure. And does it say who bought it?
Well, there's this name here, Nash.
I wonder if that could be John Nash, the great architect.
Well, I wondered the same. And in the same sale, the same Nash bought 3 Benjamin West sketches. Jacob and Laban, Resurrection of Our Saviour, and then Cupid complaining to Venus of being stung by a bee.
Huh. And what happened to them after that?
Well, on the death of John Nash in 1835, there was a sale. And these Benjamin West sketches, the ones I showed you just now, are in that sale. So I think we can say that the Nash of 1829 is John Nash, the architect.
Sure.
Frustratingly, there is no mention anywhere of the Last Supper. There's no record of it in this sale in 1835, and Nash's family destroyed all his personal records after his death. Bit of a family scandal, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've hit a dead end there. With the paper trail seemingly going cold, I need a new strategy. Could the back of the painting hold any leads? There's a sticker here, which I like to see. Expert in ancient and modern pictures. Haymarket, which is 2 or 3 minutes from here, in central London. And then I'm trying to look at the gallery name, and there's a letter, G maybe? The sticker's been ripped, I just can't quite see what that is. And what else have we got? Numbers, 3722 on the canvas, possibly from an auction house. And then above it, 405, what looks like W, perhaps? This one in particular looks familiar. I think this could be a Christie stencil. We've got a sticker and we've got numbers, and those are clues, and those are something that we can definitely investigate.
As forensic analysis continues, Aviva has made an exciting discovery about the pigments in Hugh's painting, and she's keen to share it.
These are the very, very top layers of the picture now we're looking at.
Yes, the very top layers. And what's really interesting is that you can see that there's a top layer of varnish which contains something, and I don't know how to identify it. It's this very strongly yellow fluorescing particle here. It's just one particle, and I don't know what it is. I couldn't identify it.
OK, try this thought. We know, but there's some fantastically lurid accounts for the materials he used in the 18th century, such as Indian yellow from the urine of cows only fed on mango leaves, and mummy brown, made from real mummies excavated from the ground, you know, in Egypt and places.
I am sceptical about the materials that people say they used. But I have found in this cross-section a few characteristic particles, which could be mummy, I suppose. But this fluorescing yellow area could potentially be genuine Indian yellow. Unfortunately, I can't do it because I can't identify the materials because they're organic materials, but I have a colleague who can do it.
Well, please try it, because it would be the first time in Fake or Fortune that human remains helped us with an attribution.
That dirt and damage seen under Aviva's microscope still troubles me. And I'm really concerned the painting's condition is now holding us back. So we've asked Hugh to join us in the gallery.
Hello.
Hi, Hugh.
Hi.
How are you? Nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well.
So, Hugh, we've got a decision to make, and the question is to restore it or not. Now, Philip, what are the arguments for it?
If we're going to give this picture every opportunity, it's got to look the part. And I think there are losses here which are still problematic.
I mean, it's particularly that section at the bottom, isn't it, you're thinking, Philip, where either the colour never was there or it's been abraded off in some way.
And one of the things I think we've got to really get to terms with is what varnish is meant to be there and how much of it is dirt. And that is one of those things that, with a restorer, we can really understand. And I'd love to find a signature, but there's still quite a lot, I think, that needs to come out. And restorers are used to doing this. It's first aid. It's not open heart surgery, this, but it's first aid.
I just want to sound a note of caution because, I mean, brutally, Hugh, you are taking a gamble. You spent 50 quid on this picture. More money will now be spent on having it restored, and there's no guarantee at the end of the day that the authenticating panel will come out and say it's a Benjamin West, and you might have spent the money for nothing. So given that, are you prepared to put it forward to the restorer?
Yes, I am. Sure it would shine once it's cleaned, and I will be guided by your judgment.
I like your style. OK. To the restorers.
I've sent Hugh's painting to Rupert Featherstone at the Hamilton Carr Institute at Cambridge University. Not only is Rupert a hugely experienced restorer, he also spent many years at the Royal Collection, where they have numerous examples of West's paintings. So I'm really keen to hear how the painting stands up to his experienced eye.
Hello, Rupert.
Hello, how are you?
So what are your first thoughts about this picture?
Well, it's a mixed bag. It's very interesting. There are features that remind me of Wests I've seen, but I'm not so sure about all this sort of outlining. It's slightly unusual, the sort of going almost like a comic book style, isn't there, in parts?
It strikes me as having great potential, but it's just being held back somehow. Do you think you're going to be able to resurrect this picture?
I'm pretty confident we can. And you can already see the difference in colour, so that the deep turquoisey colour of the sky is coming out. It was such a sickly green before.
So how are you going to make sure that you only take off the dirt and not what the artist intended?
What I'm doing at the moment is just removing the natural resin, and you can tell that on the swab and using ultraviolet. So I'm not going through all the layers. I certainly won't want to rush into it and clean all the way through, which is what happened before. And that's why we've ended up with this sort of abrasion and damage at the bottom.
What do you take varnish off? You've got to put paint on?
For example, Judas's face just reads as a sort of fuzzy blob at the moment, but just a couple of little bits of retouching, little dots to cover up those areas of ground, and you'll be able to see his face again, and that sort of scowl and angst or whatever.
The process of conservation takes us back to what the artist intended and might also bring about revelations.
I would just be so thrilled if you could find a signature.
I mean, where would it be? I suppose normally you'd expect a signature along the bottom edge. So one might worry that if the signature had been there, it may no longer be there. I'm going to be looking at this painting probably for more hours than anyone since the artist painted it, I suspect. So if there is a signature somewhere, I really hope I'll be able to spot it.
I've been looking into the stencils on the back of Hugh's painting, and I thought that one of them might be from a Christie's auction. We've had some exciting news from Christie's. So I've asked Hugh to come back down to London so I can share it with him.
So Hugh, do you remember the numbers on the back of your painting?
Yes.
So there was 3722
Yeah.
and 405, what looked possibly like a W.
Yes.
So we went to Christie's.
All right, yeah.
And they said, that's not 405W, that's 405V.
All right.
So that means it was sold through Christie's.
So it's record.
So it's recorded. So what we found out is the date of the sale that 405V refers to.
All right, yeah.
I've got the details here. Ancient and Modern Pictures, the property of Sir William W. Knighton, deceased. So on the third day of the sale, May the 23rd, 1885, it refers to your picture, lot 451. This is definitely your picture with 405V on the back, and it says, The Last Supper, B. West.
Oh, that's good.
I mean, that is a massive breakthrough. We've been talking about various sketches by Benjamin West. We now have information about your sketch. This is your sketch being sold by Christie's and being attributed to Benjamin West.
That's good.
Your stamp is on the back, 405V. Oh, and interestingly here, it says signed and dated. What this tells us is there is a signature on your painting.
That's good.
On your sketch, so we need to find it. I mean, obviously it could be someone pretending to be Benjamin West, but nonetheless, at this sale, it is attributed to Benjamin West.
That's good.
So we know that William Knighton sold it. Now, who bought it?
And who did buy it?
M. Cole, it says. Christie's think M. Cole is probably Martin Colnaghi.
Who is Martin Colnaghi?
Martin Colnaghi was a very, very well-known art dealer of his time. You know, a very well-known name. It's a name we come across quite often on Fake or Fortune.
We're bound to find some lead, aren't we? There'll be a record of something, will there? Hopefully.
That's exactly what we're going to do.
Yeah.
See if we can hunt down your picture.
Good, good.
Like the rest of the world, I'm having to take up the challenge of working from home. It's been productive, and I've managed to make an exciting connection. We know Benjamin West painted at least one preparatory sketch for the St. George's Chapel altarpiece, and that it went to America. I've managed to locate it, and thrillingly, it seems to have much in common with Hugh's. It was recently restored for the Fralin Museum in Virginia by conservator Beth Fulton.
Hi, Beth.
Hi there. How are you today?
Very well.
I've sent Beth all of the images Aviva took of Hugh's painting, and she's shown me hers. So together, I'm hoping we can spot the same artist's hand at work. I'm now looking at the two infrareds next to each other.
Yeah.
And it's rather exciting, isn't it?
It is. They share a lot of similarities just in the way it was drawn. You can see there are sort of the sketchy lines that he makes in the figures to denote volume.
I couldn't agree with you more. And actually, it's almost as if you're looking at an old master draftsman.
Yeah, absolutely.
If we are going to prove or try and prove ours is by Benjamin West, we will have to presumably work out where it comes in relation to yours, because ours is coloured, yours isn't.
Yeah.
There are compositional elements that seem to be slightly closer to the Detroit picture, the organisation of figures, the way the table is laid out.
Absolutely.
It would almost seem, therefore, that if ours is to be right, and it isn't someone just faking it, then ours is closer to being the sketch for the Detroit picture.
I would say so. I think in terms of a timeline, the Fralin sketch would come first, as he's just putting together this composition, and then he's making those changes closer to the final version.
It feels with Beth's help, we've mapped out a plausible evolution for this composition, but something still concerns me. Fiona has found out that Hugh's is supposed to be signed, and we haven't seen any evidence of a signature. Is yours signed?
Yes, but it's not an original signature. Someone added it later.
Right. Have you any idea when that might have been?
The paint is fairly easily soluble based on the test that we did. So my guess is that it was added sometime in the last 120 years. Yeah.
so this is an area where there's a bit of dark practice going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is definitely an issue with people who might want to try to fake a West. However, I think in this case, it's just someone who's trying to make sure that people are thinking of West when they see this.
Having a fake signature on a fully attributed West is a bit of a shock and a reminder that it takes more than an autograph to prove that a work is genuine. So having compared both works, does Beth believe Benjamin West produced Hugh's sketch?
I would have to imagine that it was someone, if not the artist himself, someone very close to the artist who maybe even worked directly with him.
Yeah, but Hugh's not going to be very pleased if we tell him it's by someone we can't name who knew the artist very well and was very familiar with the artist's techniques. But
right. Without primary documentation, I just can't guarantee to say that this is definitely by West, unfortunately.
while we haven't been able to travel abroad, the paint sample Aviva took from the surface of Hugh's painting happily made its way to Amsterdam, and the results are back. Have the team there been able to identify at a molecular level anything that could identify West as the painting's creator?
What we know is that West used this great variety of organic materials, really exotic, daring colours, you could say, including things, it was said, like ground mummy, that would produce a sort of rich, morbid brown.
What, literally ground mummy?
Apparently so. Now, we haven't found any of that in the picture, but exciting news from Klaas Jan from the Rijksmuseum laboratory in Amsterdam. What Jan has discovered is a chemical called euxanthone, which would almost certainly indicate the use of Indian yellow. Indian yellow that is created from the dried urine of cows that have been fed on mango leaves.
And, oh my goodness, and what, fed on mango leaves to make it extra yellow?
Well, presumably a sort of super yellow or something.
Yuck. Right, okay.
But this is where it gets interesting, because in the late 18th century and around that period, a lot of artists claimed to use Indian yellow, but the reality was it was just sort of too expensive. These exotic ingredients were beyond them.
So if you were going to use Indian yellow, which we know is in Hugh's picture, you'd have to be a successful artist just to have the money to buy it. A successful artist like Benjamin West, for example.
Exactly. So the paints, the cost of the paints, narrowed down the range of possibilities as to the artist.
So Benjamin West and his exotic papers, who knew? Back to the Christie's stencil on the back of Hugh's picture. It's proved for us that Hugh's sketch was sold at auction in 1885 as a Benjamin West. We suspect the buyer was art dealer Martin Colnaghi. As Colnaghi is one of the oldest art dealerships in Britain, I'm hoping its archives will reveal more. So I've come to the rather magnificent place they're held, Waddesdon Manor in Buckinghamshire. Hugh has clearly already settled in.
Nice and you?
Hello, Fiona. How are you?
I'm good. Look at this.
Do you like it?
What a place.
It's just home. It's just home.
You wish. Come on. Should we go inside?
I'm hoping historian Jeremy Howard can confirm Martin Colnaghi was the 1885 buyer and tell us where the painting went next.
Hi there.
Hello. Welcome to Waddesdon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're researching Hugh's picture, which you bought on eBay, and we've managed to establish that there is a Christie's stock number on the back, which suggests that it was obviously sold through Christie's to
an M. Cole, that's all we can see, and I'm assuming that's Martin Colnaghi, and I'm wondering if you can shed any light on that.
Well, it could be Martin Colnaghi, but the thing is he didn't work for the family firm for very long. He was actually a very good art dealer, was regarded as having one of the best eyes in the business.
Oh,
so,
all right.
Things are looking up. Yes.
We have in the archive a miniature of Martin Colnaghi, the man who bought your picture at one stage, which was done in 1908, the year of his death.
Thank you. He looks a very distinguished man, doesn't he? With a good eye. Painting.
Absolutely.
The first gallery he bought was in the Haymarket.
Hang on, Haymarket?
Yes. There's a Haymarket stamp on the back of the painting, isn't there?
Exactly, because on the back of Hugh's picture is a stamp that says Modern and Ancient Pictures, Haymarket.
Oh, well, that's really interesting, because he would have been in the Haymarket in the mid-1880s.
Any records of sales?
Unfortunately, I don't think it's possible to check that, because unfortunately he died in 1908. He had no children to carry on the business. And as far as I know, the business records were actually destroyed in 1940, which is when his widow died.
Destroyed it?
Again?
I know, just like John Nash's archive as well. What is it with these people? I have to say, I thought that coming to meet you, Jeremy, would get us over the line with the archive, but there's literally nothing.
So I don't think we're going to be able to help you further, unfortunately.
Once again, we're thwarted by a destroyed archive, and our provenance trail is cut short. Thanks to the Christie stencil and the Haymarket label on the back of Hugh's pictures, we know for sure that it was sold in 1885 as being The Last Supper by Benjamin West, no question. But then whiz forward to the 1960s, when we know it came into the possession of the people who then sold it to Hugh. We've got a gap between 1885 and the 1960s, about 70 years. So have we done enough? Well, we do know there was a Benjamin West Last Supper, it's missing, and it's almost exactly the same dimensions as Hugh's. Is that enough? I hope so. It's time to wrap up our investigation.
Rupert has completed the restoration work, and we're all meeting back at the gallery.
Hello.
Hi, Hugh.
Hi.
Hi, Hugh. Could I introduce Rupert?
Hello, Rupert. How are you?
Nice to meet you.
Looking forward to seeing this. Oh.
What
It's
do you
almost
think?
a different painting, isn't it?
Rupert has dramatically rectified over 200 years' worth of damage and mistreatment.
There's more of a light and dark quality to the thing now, isn't there? It's fantastic, isn't it?
The colours are strong, and they were all there. They just couldn't see them.
By taking off the dirt, by putting back those crucial losses, that atmosphere that was hinted at in the church, I think you've got back. It's got depth, more mysticism about it.
I love this light here on the back of Judas. I think that's really beautiful. Couldn't see that before.
It's a lovely thing to work on, actually. Very satisfying.
It's not exactly like the finished painting, you know, it's the first draft.
I think it's good it's not exactly the same as the other. It makes it much more likely to be before rather than after.
There's one remaining puzzle. When this painting was sold at Christie's in 1885, it was listed as signed and dated. Has Rupert uncovered anything to solve that?
Did you find a signature or a ghost of a signature?
Well, I think possibly yes. If you look bottom, slightly left of the centre, below the cloth on the tablecloth, what looked to me like a date, and then in front of that, the remnants of 4 letters. What do you think, Philip?
Do you mind if I have a look? I mean, there is absolutely no doubt about it. There is something there.
I have to say, if you hadn't pointed this out, I would never have known this was there. I just think this is just marks.
Yes, but they're different marks. It's not in the same pigments as the drawing lines. So if it's not a signature, I don't know what it is.
But I mean, the exciting thing is, even if we can't entirely read it, we know that the lost picture that we hope this to be was once signed.
Lying a complete West signature over the fragmentary remaining signature, I think it's a good fit.
Fiona, did you find out anything about the painting after Colnaghi bought it?
Gave it a good shot, but
can't quite prove it, I'm afraid.
dear.
So after Colnaghi, no, we hit a bit of a dead end there, so the
Yeah.
provenance is still elusive, I'm sorry.
I don't think we should be too glum. An unfurling provenance that has every single name, that is unbroken, it's quite rare. I mean, we've got a lot. I mean, you've done very well there.
It's just not as tightly nailed down as I would like it.
Right.
And I know you're thrilled with this squiggle, but it is still just a squiggle.
It's called a signature. It's called a signature.
It's judgment time. Martin Postle from the Paul Mellon Centre for Studies in British Art has been consulting with Columbia University's Professor Alan Staley, author of the Benjamin West Catalogue Raisonné. These are the people the art world trusts to authenticate a Benjamin West. They will be the ones to decide, is this a Benjamin West? And have we found the missing sketch?
I have to say, throughout the whole process of researching this picture, I've kept on, as it were, getting what feels like messages of Benjamin West's presence in the way that he uses his colours, in the lines that run throughout the composition. But as much as I rate this, unfortunately, the decision is not mine. And the people who the art world will listen to on this will not necessarily share my view.
Martin, very good to see you. I know you and Professor Staley have been considering Hugh's sketch.
Yeah. This is torture.
Put him out of his misery. You're feeling pretty tense,
I'm
aren't you?
suffering.
What conclusion have you come to?
Well, this is a really interesting picture. West's a really linear painter. So even when he's using paint, he's thinking about compositional lines. And here you can see, especially in this foreground, in the figure of Judas and the figures at the right, there's little kind of compositional lines that run right the way through it. It's absolutely feels like a Benjamin West in every aspect.
Fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's really fantastic.
It is.
That's good.
So I think you can relax on that score.
Yeah.
We've conferred about it, and we're both in agreement that this is absolutely right. Bang on, yeah. I think, having looked at the evidence, the provenance, you know, there are not many gaps, and that's important. And I think this is the picture that was sold by West's sons in 1829, so after his death. But you know, it was actually belonged to the family. I think that's important. So I also wonder whether it's the picture that West showed at the Royal Academy in 1804.
All right.
It's had an interesting life.
Yeah.
It's had a varied career.
It's got
shall we
rich history,
say.
hasn't it?
It's had a rich history.
Well, it just shows also all those dark nights scrolling through eBay, and look.
Well, find a painting, nobody was interested in it, and nobody bid against me. And for you to do all the work and find out that it actually is original, it's very fulfilling.
Just remind us, what did you buy it for on eBay?
£50.
Oh, Hugh. That breaks my heart.
So what do we think now, Philip?
He is one of the founding fathers of American painting, as well as history painter to the king. So I think you could probably add 3 zeros to your £50. I think it's a £50,000 work of art.
That's good. Good news.
Okay, go and buy some more. And I think it's a very handsome object in its own right. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank
well
you.
Well done.
And I know this picture has been cleaned, but now we know so much of the backstory, and we've had it all confirmed. This little picture really seems to glow.
It does, and Hugh is certainly glowing after all that. I can't help feeling sorry for the people who sold it to him for £50, but, you know, that's the way it goes. And Hugh, in amongst looking after his sheep and cows, is still trawling through the internet for pictures. So who knows? We might see him back here one day.